Welcome to CandleLight Audiobook. Chapter 101. Did he take over the casino? Yes, the Crown Prince has sold the casino. It's going to be announced. Why? Wasn't the casino still managed by the Crown Prince? She couldn't understand why it was suddenly sold off. Why? His Highness would not have intended to sell the casino. She tried to ask him if the Crown Prince had no intention to sell the casino, but she hurriedly closed her mouth. Then eyes poured on her, who did not keep her speech. In particular, the eyes of Asher were persistent. She was horrified that his blue eyes would pierce her heart. He glared his eyes as if to hasten the following words of Celine. I thought so. So she hurriedly changed her words as if she had been thinking. Fortunately, it continued naturally. But the content wasn't. Asher, who had been watching the debate all along, asked, Why did you think so? That's because he didn't sell it in the past. The Crown Prince had run the casino until a big accident had happened. Everyone had accused him of being incapable and had cursed him for ruining the empire. Celine also remembered that she had helped with the voice. It's not long since he started managing it on behalf of Viscount Lupre. If he were going to dispose of it so quickly, wouldn't it be normal not to take it in the first place? On a plausible excuse, most seemed convinced that she had thought so. But it wasn't Asher. He asked tenaciously again as if to interrogate her, there is a possibility that he managed the casino for a while to investigate it in detail. Since then, isn't it natural to say that he sold it to the right person? It can't be. Viscount Vig is a core person among the aristocratic party, but how could he be the right man for the Crown Prince? Well. Instead of answering Celine's question, he put his mouth up and laughed. At the smile, Celine realized that she was thinking something wrong. What the hell did I miss? After a moment of thought, she found the answer in the words used by Asher. The meaning of the words "the right person" was a trap. What do you mean? It means that he is not suitable for good management for the casino. Perhaps, it can be interpreted that he is the right person for the Crown Prince to play on. The one who didn't know the truth seemed to be Celine alone. The attention and interest poured on her, who grasped the meaning faster than they thought and more accurately. Because the financial Cr Julia for the aristocratic party is at stake, Viscount Vig, who took over the casino, has to put himself on steam. If he makes a contribution this time, he'll be in a different position. She grasped the flow, but there was one strange thing. In the past, Viscount Vig had not been included in the casino case, but why did he enter this time? Unlike in the past, who persuaded the Crown Prince? Had it been done after the last meeting she had insisted on doing so? An outcome would change if there was a cause, but no matter how many times she thought, the only reason that came to her mind was the remarks she had made in this meeting. That can't be. At the very least, what the 15-year-old girl's suggestion could not have been in the ear of the Crown Prince. It was strange that the Crown Prince had suddenly changed his mind, but the same thing had happened before, so she thought it might be just a butterfly effect. Besides, it was a gathering attended by Vika, the leader of the aristocratic party. If this meeting was related to the Crown Prince, it would change into a very complicated and dangerous one. And there was a big reason to lower that possibility very much. In the past, the Crown Prince had succumbed to the aristocratic party. If Vika had really been a member of the Crown Prince's party who had infiltrated as a spy to the aristocratic party, he would have somehow tried to dig up information and help the Crown Prince. You are very intelligent. There was admiration on Asher's face. He seemed genuinely surprised at Celine's reasoning here alone. Therefore, after the meeting was over, and after everyone had gone back, the praise for Celine was not over. The face of Celine, who had the impudence, was so full of embarrassment. You don't have to exaggerate and praise me. I was the only one who didn't know the fact. We didn't share the information with you, so it was natural that you didn't know. But you inferred a conclusion by yourself. I don't think anyone can do it easily. Anyone can do it if they have a little time. No, it was possible because you were special. So I keep coming up with your face. Celine's hands, which were packing the hourglass, stiffened by the casual remark. Looking at him in surprise, his blue, dark, serious eyes were staring at her. What did you say? When Celine stopped and asked, Asher, who realized what he had said, clicked his tongue briefly and said, It's true, so I won't give you any other excuses. Thud. She was shocked as if someone had hit her heart. She had heard this so many times in the past, but she couldn't answer or act. All she could do was try to calm her heart, which was pumping fast enough. I didn't mean to approach you with that thought, but you keep shaking me. Shaking produced no difference between them. Why do you keep putting me in trouble when I was reborn with revenge? Celine's hand, which had stretched out to take the box, moved again. This useless feeling was unnecessary for her now. I'm not sure what you're trying to say. It had no more voice for Celine, who turned around coldly, whether it had been the same for Asher either. The confusion was brought about earlier than expected. In the past, it had been not until midsummer that they had started feeling a little uncomfortable, but this time it started earlier in the summer. Of course, the sugar Celine had bought was the first. The loss of inventory, which should have been in stock, caused great pains earlier than in the past. The missing sugar definitely changed the taste of the food. Even Lyra, who did not eat only what she wanted, hesitated to eat. It was because she had already gotten used to the sweet taste. I wish the customs would handle it quickly. The Count's low voice rang out at the dining hall, where they had not even heard of any sound of a dish. It was a very angry voice. So who told you to monopolize sugar? After the sugar trade route had been blocked, the aristocrat who had monopolized it might have rushed to import sugar in search of another client, but it had been too late. It seemed that he had found another supplier, but the customs office had not given him permission. I think that the customs office has a hard and fast rule without flexibility. No matter how important the order and procedures are, there are a lot of people who are suffering from this kind of inconvenience, Lyra complained. Celine was sick and tired of the dual personality of Lyra, who was pretending to be the kindest and most benevolent person in the world, but only when it came to her own business, she felt uncomfortable and distressed. Then the Count helped Lyra, adding his opinion. The customs says it's been a long time since all its work was transferred to his jurisdiction of the Crown Prince, but I'm suspicious of his abilities. I'm worried about how he'll succeed His Majesty because he doesn't grasp what the priority is. Although he seemed concerned about the future of the Empire, the Count's concern was the future of the Empire in which they would be happy. There were more people who did not belong to it than those who did. At the words of the Count, Celine was convinced that this had been led by the Crown Prince. Then, was he a man of the Crown Prince who was arrested as the main culprit in the past? If there was no mention of any other character, he seemed to have escaped well. It took a little longer to wait for the price of sugar to soar. At first, they tried to put up with their anger without expressing it. It took a little time to realize that it was all useless. That was the right time. So Celine enjoyed reading while waiting for the right time. Books that had been difficult to turn a page at first became easy to turn now. It seemed to be, thanks to a steady reading. It might be due to the fact that she had participated in Asher's meeting and broadened her knowledge. Their conversation level had been pretty high. Chapter 102. After a light breakfast, she sat quietly and immersed herself in the book, but today there was an unusually noisy mess inside and outside the mansion. What's going on? Celine, who had been quiet all the time, suddenly spoke to herself. Then Barry, who was wiping the clean floor with a dry mop, lowered her body in surprise. I haven't even bothered you for a long time, but you've already been afraid of me. When she opened the window with her tongue clicked and checked out, she could see the servants and maids moving around busily. Because of a series of incidents, the Count has vacated the mansion often, so there would be no guests. However, they were eager to put their efforts to receive such a great guest. When she called Annie out of curiosity and asked why, Annie immediately spewed out the information. Oh my! I forgot to tell you. Princess Frederick is coming today. I heard she's having a tea party with Miss Lyra. Celine hadn't even known that this mishap had happened because she had not called Annie, who had been taken a rest because she had enjoyed reading quietly. It seemed to have heard a similar story directly from Lyra's mouth, but she must have forgotten it. Princess Frederick. She was the one Celine didn't want to encounter yet. It was clear that Celine would be in bad shape if she encountered the princess with her present self, who had nothing else to show. It was more so since the rumor with Oscar had spread. So she had tried to avoid meeting the princess, but unfortunately, Princess Frederick had no intention of doing so. "Well, miss, the princess is waiting downstairs." The princess had wanted to say hello and send a maid to her. How could she avoid it? Celine was just a daughter of a vulgar prostitute. If she avoided the princess, an absurd rumor might spread. Of course, it was unclear if a good rumor would spread with her meeting, but it was better to give no room. "Tell her I understand." It was a poor pronunciation since she bit her lips, but it was best to answer that. "Yes, miss." Celine took a sigh, looking at the maid who was going down and saw her in front of the mirror. It was very annoying, but she never had to make anything to be blamed. It was only a short while after the acquisition had been completed that the news of the acquisition of the casino by Viscount Vig entered the ear of the princess. It was because Vika had forced Viscount Vig not to tell anyone until the acquisition had been completed. Vika had emphasized the secret, saying that he had persuaded the crown prince to sell it at a low price by cheating him, and had added a warning that if someone would find out, it would certainly be difficult to acquire. Viscount Vig, who had only inherited the successful business of his predecessor, had believed the words without doubt, and due to it, the takeover of the casino had ended, not unknown to the outside world, except for a handful of people who had been involved in. Therefore, the princess and her close aides who had belatedly learned of this fact had been forced to vent their anger at the stupidity Viscount Vig had done. He had been so desperate for immediate profits that he had abandoned the great weapon that they could strangle the crown prince. How lucky the crown prince is. The princess wanted to buy the luck of the crown prince, who had avoided the misfortune of strangling his neck. She could see the end of this breathtaking tug-of-war, but when she had felt that she had won as she had pulled the rope as hard as she could, and she had loosened it, he had pulled it back again. It must have been the crown prince who had blocked the trade route by selecting luxuries that were safe for the common people. She didn't know if he was going to cut off the cash cow, but it wouldn't be that simple and easy with the family of Count Vermont. "Princess Julia. You've had a hard time coming all the way." "Good to see you, Lyra." Arriving at the mansion of the family of Count Vermont, Julia was able to regain stability by watching Lyra greet her with a bright smile. Recently a series of bad things had caused her to lose her appetite, but when she looked at Lyra who was shaking her tail, she breathed easy again. Not long ago, the princess had doubted the crown prince and Lyra because of the unsavory things that had happened on her birthday, but after careful examination, she had been able to find no other contact between Lyra and the crown prince, so that she could again have a favor with Lyra. "I'm sorry I'm late." "No. Never mind." It was only a remark, but it was none of her business to worry about as Lyra answered. It might have been a problem if someone had made the princess wait, but if she had someone waiting for herself was quite within the normal range. "Gift. Thank you very much." As they moved into the garden where the refreshments were ready, the princess asked Lyra, "How are all other young ladies?" "I am so busy that I don't have time to meet." "Yes, everyone is looking forward to seeing you. But at the same time, they wish that the work you are doing is done well." It was up to Lyra to manage those who supported the princess. It was because she was favored most by the princess. Rumors that she would become the next hostess of the family of Duke Frederick also played a part. So even though she had done nothing, Lyra became the next one after the princess in power. Fortunately, however, there was no need to take care of them otherwise. Most of the ladies wanted to keep a close relationship with the princess and Lyra for a long time. It was for their bright and brilliant future. "It's a pleasure, then." "Maybe it's because they're broad-minded and friendly." "I think it's because of the grace and virtue you sowed." Everyone likes and respects the princess. Indeed, Lyra was the faithful dog of Princess Julia. No matter what questions the princess asked or said, her answer ended in the praise of the princess. Julia sat on a prepared chair, smiling contentedly. Aside from the financial resources, Lyra was fit for Oscar's wife. Julia chose a topic Lyra would be pleased to hear, who was making every effort to please her. "The brooch goes very well together. Mr. Oscar sent it to me." It's so pretty that I wear it every day. I thought so. Oscar has a similar brooch. Is that true? Yes, it is. He bought it because it was a beautiful diamond, but he said that when he saw it, he thought of Lady Lyra. Oh, my God. Did he say that? So I had a brooch similar to Mr. Oscar's. It's Oscar's favorite brooch. Julia's eyes were warm as she saw Lyra, who was moved to tears. Maybe Lyra would have known that the brooch that she had received as a gift had not come from Oscar. Nevertheless, she must keep her pride by pretending not to know. It was a very desirable attitude of an aristocratic lady. Oscar had never bought brooches or jewelry. But that Oscar had been carrying a brooch. And the princess had questioned him in doubt. The daughter of the vulgar prostitute had come forward. She had been going to throw it away in the gutter, but she had changed her mind and put it back in Oscar's hand. And she had made a similar brooch and sent it to Lyra as a gift. From now on, this brooch isn't from the daughter of a dirty prostitute, but it's for you and Lyra. Do you understand? Julia, who had clenched the hand of Oscar who had rather tried to destroy it, had warned in a low voice, "Let's help the daughter of a prostitute, who has barely stepped into the aristocratic society, live in peace." Then he had listened to her without any resistance, and he had been looked so cute to her. By the way, I haven't seen the new person who has come to the family of the Count yet. Ah. You're talking about that person. Lyra lowered her voice, conscious of her surroundings. She must have thought of her image. Yes, I'm talking about that person. No matter how humble she is, I don't know which country's manner has it if she does not come down to say hello. Is that the manner of that person who lived in the place we don't even want to talk about? Chapter 103. Maybe. I think so. Because they didn't even want to call her name, Celine became known as that person in no time. Nevertheless, the princess wanted to see her face once. She wondered what face the fox-like girl had, who had bewitched her blunt brother. Julia ordered one of her servants to call Celine. Then Lyra suggested with an awkward smile, "Why don't you think about it?" "Why?" "I'm just trying to call her because she doesn't say hello. It's not the kind of person the princess is going to meet. I'm sure you'll just feel bad." "Really? Then I'll have to meet her even more. That person will be poisonous to Lady Lyra." Lyra bit her lips with a very awkward face. It seemed that Lyra did not want Julia to meet Celine. Julia's mind was full of questions because it was the first time Lyra was so hyper-contradictory. And the question was settled neatly after a while when Celine appeared. "I'm sorry I'm late, Princess Frederick. I'm Celine." The graceful bending gesture of her knees showed no fault. Based on the rumors, Celine had been doing the mischievous acts the princess was about to find fault with and scold her harshly as soon as she had come to the mansion, but when she personally met Celine, she could not think of anything to scold her about. Besides, isn't that face pretty? She was the daughter of a prostitute, who had lured the Count and made herself the Countess. The new maid, who brought out Celine's teacup, stopped Julia, who was looking at Celine from head to toe. Julia was awakened by the slight noise the new maid made. She then said in a calm manner, "I'm pleased. I guess you weren't feeling well, were you?" Celine nodded to the inevitable rebuke. "Not really, but I decided that it's difficult to visit the princess first with a humble body." As the daughter of the prostitute, she was quite adept at coping with the situation. Julia's mouth went up. "I see. It's my fault. I should have called you first. Sit down." Celine sat down, putting down a box that made Julia curious since she didn't know why Celine had brought it. Despite the addition of unnecessary movements, Celine showed graceful, clean movements, and Julia narrowed her eyes and observed her carefully. When did she learn that? She's learned such a good etiquette in just 2 years? She's just the daughter of a vulgar prostitute, right? It was hard to believe. At the sight of Julia, who was watching Celine thoroughly, Lyra's complexion gradually turned pale. Lyra seemed to think that the evaluation of Celine that was mimicking the nobles might have increased. But Julia had no intention of doing so. It might seem plausible on the surface, but it was empty inside. Being from a humble and dirty background, even though the way she dressed and ate changed, her origin could not be changed. Have you adapted yourself to the family of Count Vermont? I'm trying. It's been 2 years, and it's not enough to just try. You shouldn't bring dishonor to the family of the Count. I'll keep that in mind. There are a lot of people who already feel bad about the family of the Count because of the rumors that are going on in public, so you'll have to hurry. Of course, most of the rumors that were known to the public were brought to Julia's attention. Half of what she knew was from Lyra, and the other half was from her imagination. She hadn't met her, but she had thought Celine wouldn't be much different from the rumor. The princess was furious when she heard from Lyra that the Count was likely to remarry. She could not accept a prostitute in the family that was going to become in-laws with the family of the Duke later. She wouldn't even accept a mere commoner, but she was about to become worse than that. It was Julia, who had urged Lyra not to let the Count marry again at all cost. Julia had told Lyra that it would be a shame on her family and that it would ruin her name. In addition, even Lyra might be insulted. So Julia had wanted Lyra to get rid of the prostitute and her daughter. However, the Count had not stopped taking in the prostitute, even as he had read the countenances of the public, and eventually, the dirty stone had rolled in and firmly rooted in the family of Count Vermont. Without knowing who she was, the dirty stone, named Celine, even answered questions and replied to her reproving words. I'll do my best. Even this time, Celine answered with a clear voice without changing her face, and it made Julia uncomfortable. Celine picked up the teacup and took a sip from it. It was the black tea of Cranberg province that Julia brought. Do you know how precious that tea is, which you are drinking now? Julia thought. It was clear that Celine couldn't tell the difference between the black tea and other teas. How's the tea? Various emotions were in the eyes of Julia, who asked. The biggest of them was the look that was searching Celine of something she could abuse her with. Celine, who took one more sip of tea, answered slowly. I can feel the bitterness in my mouth. It's also sour. Is this the black tea of Cranberg province? Julia's eyes stiffened at the unexpected answer. So did Lyra. How can a daughter of a prostitute know what it is after taking a few sips? Yes, you know that well. Celine's reply followed Julia's quivering answer. I heard it is a famous tea that was usually served in summer. It would have been better if the maid had put half a spoonful of sugar. Drinking without it is one way to do it. It's an honor to drink such a precious tea just as it is about to get hot. Silence followed after her impeccable answer. Julia was going to accuse Celine of not knowing a cup of tea properly, but she couldn't do that anymore. Celine was determined, and she did not show any weak points. After that, Julia asked a few more questions with the aim of abusing Celine, but only calm answers came back. In the end, Julia told Celine to leave the room without any reprimand or criticism. Thank you for calling, Princess. Celine, who took care of the hourglass on the table, bowed politely and disappeared. Julia didn't know when Celine had taken out the hourglass, but Julia narrowed her brow, thinking of Celine, who had been natural and elegant enough to not even notice Celine's action. Celine, who returned to her room, sighed deeply and sat down on the sofa. The hourglass on her lap was very heavy. If it hadn't been for the hourglass, the last words I would have heard before leaving the garden would have been ridicule from the princess. Julia, which had been criticizing her for not knowing about teas because she was from the common people, rang out in her head. Lyra, who had helped Julia, next to her, had looked very excited. Celine had turned over the hourglass and repeated what they had said, and her cold hand was trembling and was hidden under the table. Because she had used the hourglass, Celine felt tired and ordered her maid to bring tea, touching her eyes. It was clear that if she fell asleep in a rigid state, she would suffer the next day. Soon after she drank the jasmine tea that Barry brought her, she felt a little relaxed. Princess Frederick. Was it because of the rumors with Oscar? It was the first time that she had met such a look filled with purely evil intentions, so Celine was nervous. She laid in bed and was reassured that she did everything, so she wouldn't be scolded. When she closed her eyes were blacked out by the sudden eagerness to sleep. Some time later, as expected, all the sugar had run out, and there were people who were suffering. Celine showed mercy to them. The first place she laid her hands on was Flower Mountain, a cafe frequented by the nobility. It was also the place where Celine had gone with Annie and Jessica. And it was the place that had been damaged the most because there were lots of drinks made with a variety of stylish and flavored ingredients. Celine sent Andrew there to talk to the owner secretly that she could supply sugar. The owner of Flower Mountain has shown interest, and the price is going to become 10 times more than what it was. Chapter 104. Celine smiled contentedly as she checked the letter she had received through Annie. It started tenfold. Flower Mountain was a favorite place for most aristocrats, and soon rumors started to spread. Then there would be a flood of questions about where the sugar came from, as if they had found a ray of light in the dark, and somehow they would try their best to get the sugar. Even if it would cost more than 20 times the price of established sugar. As Celine expected, the rumor quickly spread throughout the capital as she supplied sugar to the Flower Mountain. The Flower Mountain, where they had focused enjoying leisure, was filled with aristocrats in the capital, and the sugar she had supplied quickly ran out, and it delighted Celine. "Where the hell did you get it? If you have any spares, sell it to me, too." As all carriages and people entering the capital were investigated, unauthorized sugar except in very small quantities was not allowed to be brought in. In the first place, it was a precious material that nobody could seek except for the nobility, and the aristocrats had prevented its cultivation, so they could monopolize it. Had it not been for that, it would not have been so chaotic. The owner of the Flower Mountain answered with an embarrassing face to the noblemen who were shouting without dignity. "I'm sorry, but I can't answer it because I just happened to get it." He was a low-class aristocrat, who had succeeded with a cafe but was a merchant before then. Even though they were nobles, who he was dealing with, she couldn't just say where the sugar came from. Moreover, there was still a little time left until the day Andrew had said he would visit again. It was stupid of him to share sugar hastily when he didn't know how much more sugar Andrew would supply. He bowed several times, saying, "I'm sorry," to those who came in every day and urged him to sell sugar. Andrew, who visited the Flower Mountain again and sold sugar, took a look around the cafe, which was overflowing with nobles that he couldn't enter anymore. Then he said he would not sell the sugar to anyone unless they paid double, as he had been ordered. "It's too expensive, isn't it? That's 20 times the original price." The owner's face turned pale when Andrew said he would sell the sugar, which was already expensive since the beginning, at a price that was 20 times more expensive. "I'd like to make a suggestion then. I'll give you a large supply of sugar as much as I raise the price, so you can use it any way you like." That meant that he wouldn't mind that buying it at 20 times the price and selling it back at several times the price. However, the restriction was that he should not reveal where he obtained the sugar from. But while the owner, burdened with the price of 20 times, was agonizing for a while, Andrew got up from his seat, without a regret. "I can't help it if you don't like it. I have to sell it to others. Please, wait a minute." If he offered to sell sugar on the same terms, Andrew would have more than enough people to fill the square. The owner of the Flower Mountain might also have to line up at the square if he missed this opportunity now. And obviously, since Andrew said he wouldn't care about where he used it afterward, it was clear that he would rake in huge sums of money if he did well. Andrew sat down again because the owner stretched out and grabbed his sleeve. Andrew was dressed neatly with Celine's support, but his clothes were wrinkled. But when he brushed it off with the back of his hand, it proved worth it to be back in place as if nothing had happened. "Well, I don't know how much you have, but it takes a while to get that kind of money. I'll supply it to you in 2 then. I'll also split the price and receive it in 2. Why don't you get a reservation in between and raise funds?" It was as expected, and he answered as he had been told by Celine, and the owner nodded hard, thinking if this was such a golden piece of cake. "It's a small amount, so you'll be fine if you charge a few more times from the nobles." Andrew's words were true. Since there was a sugar famine, there were plenty of people who would like to buy it, no matter how much it would cost. Using Andrew's words as a reference, the owner of the Flower Mountain told customers, who were looking for sugar, that he could sell it in small quantities, and he ran out of sugar in an instant because of a direct reservation. There was, of course, a voice of condemnation. "Isn't it too expensive? It's almost 30 times the original price. I'm sorry. I'd like to give you a discount, but that's the way the price was brought in. Sugar is so precious that I can't help it. In fact, people lined up to buy, even if he sold it at 30 times the price. The nobles saved money to buy other luxuries and invested in buying sugar. A day without sugar was like hell for aristocrats, who became accustomed to sweetness. Celine burst into laughter when she saw the warehouse running out and her bank balance becoming thick. Barry, who was pouring tea, trembled at that high tone with astonishment, and Jessica cocked her head, and only Annie, who knew the situation, smiled facing Celine. What are you going to do with that money, miss? Are you going to keep saving? No, I don't intend to save it. Celine was planning to invest again as much as she earned. She had to continue to invest and expand her power by attracting people around her. She had to do so if she wanted to deal with Lyra that had the support of the princess. Otherwise, she was sure that she would be decapitated again. In the past, Celine was not interested in the public because she was still young and was getting smeared a bit by the playfulness of the maids Lyra had sent. Celine only remembered a fraction of what people were talking about. Instead, it was so stimulating and all the people of the empire were interested in it. For example, it was about the crown prince's performance, the rise of the status of a daughter of the ordinary viscount, or the ingredients of the food that had gone into the mouth immediately. And there was another thing she remembered. It was perfumed hair oil that had long emerged as a substitute after the chaos of luxury goods led to the disappearance of sugar and honey. Perfumed hair oil with sweet scents collected from flowers had become popular for some time. Eating hadn't made the sweet taste strong, but it had smelled nice. So the trend of smelling until the sugar was supplied again had been spreading, and it had gone quite long. The man who sold it, who was it? Maybe he was Baron Burboom. He had been a nobleman but without presence. He had said it had been a family business, but due to lack of funds, he could not supply the perfume on time, and he had lost all of his share of the perfume in the market, by a new businessman. Celine remembered going straight to buy when the fashion had first begun. I should invest in him. She didn't have enough experience and manpower to start a new business now. Therefore, it was better to invest and share profits. In addition, it was not too bad to continue feeding and taming him, giving information. That's all I have to do if I'm going to increase my power since I have nothing. Let's approach Baron Burboom for now. I'll see if he's worth it. Celine sent a letter straight to Andrew. It was about meeting Baron Burboom. She enclosed a letter that she had a great interest in the perfume business and would like to invest. Some time later, a reply to the letter said, "Thank you for the proposal, and I will gladly accept it." So the contract was made in a short period of time and without a hitch. With the drastic requirement to pay 30% of the revenue to Celine, Baron Burboom, who needed funding for a smooth supply, could not turn down her proposal because the trend of the perfume had already started. Chapter 105. Baron Burboom, who had received the investment, expanded his business by hiring more staff and hurriedly created the perfume with Celine's advice. This made it possible to prepare enough perfumes before the trend started properly, and he enclosed a gift with a thank you letter to Celine. Thank you very much. With Mr. A's foresight, I was able to make the most profit. It's a small gift, but it's a token of gratitude, so please accept it. Celine's lips drew a good line after reading the letter Annie had brought. When she unpacked the present that he enclosed, it contained cravat. The embroidery between the waves of fine silk was very beautiful. I thought so, but he thought I was a man. The cravat worn to make the fine look on the neck was for men. It might have been quite expensive, but it was of little use to the recipient. Celine, who put it back in the box, called Annie. I'm going to have to go out. Really? You haven't been out in a long time. Actually, I wanted to go out, too. The place where she arrived with Annie, who was so excited, was the perfume store of Baron Burboom. The store had expanded to a considerable size with investments and profits for the time being. Celine, who had 2 nights outside because of their annoyance, went inside. Annie's eyes glistened when she was told to pick a favorite perfume and looked through the store and went away. Then Celine, who became alone, looked through the interior and appreciated it. Along with the luxurious interior, the height of the stand with perfume was appropriate. They were all well placed in a relaxed reach for smaller women compared to men. So did the color arrangement. Sometimes colors would be placed on an unknown basis for the unthinking, but this place was not. Starting with a bright color, the color gradually added to the darkest color at the end. The combination of colors was different, but her eyes were pleasant as if they were looking at a galaxy. Maybe he's better than I thought. Celine headed to the counter after she had finished her appreciation. The waitress who was waiting greeted her in a polite manner. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to see Baron Burboom." "Sir Baron?" The staff opened her eyes big. She looked puzzled when Celine said she would come to meet the Baron. The clerk looked very carefully at Celine's dress and disappeared after saying, "Please wait for a moment." As she saw Celine, she seemed to be quite a wealthy aristocrat. Moments later, Baron Burboom, who appeared with the staff, was quite a young man. He only looked 25 to 26 at best. Still, his neatly dressed clothes and hair made him look quite a plausible businessman. Coming down from the second floor while talking to the employee, he found Celine waiting in front of the counter with the request of the staff and could not speak for a moment with a stunned look on his face. "Baron Burboom, I've come here with a message to tell and deliver you something." He pointed to the second floor with a stiff face and hand gestures without even confirming who Celine was. Celine folded her eyes and smiled at this, and the Baron's cheeks turned red. "Do you mind if I go upstairs?" "Yeah." "Oh, yeah." He nodded to her question like a broken buggy doll. He was hard and awkward, but he did his best to escort Celine and ordered a staff to prepare the best refreshments for her. The sugar in the market had run out, but he got some from somewhere else, and Celine asked, drinking tea that was delicately sweet with sugar. "Who do you think I am to treat me like this?" It wasn't even a sharp question, but Baron Burboom stammered. "Well, I don't know. May I ask your name?" "I'm Vermont Celine." At the words that she was the wicked woman of the rumor stopped Burboom's hand that was trying to hold the teacup. Celine asked calmly because she expected his reaction. "Are you disappointed?" "No." "If you are Lady Celine from the Vermont family, are you only 15 years old?" Celine's eyes widened at the unexpected question. "So?" "Ha. Oh, my God. You're 15. How could you?" Burboom hid his face in his palms and uttered a grotesque exclamation. Celine stared at him because of his incomprehensible response. From time to time, he stole a glance at Celine through his fingers and repeatedly sighed. He soon removed his hands and faced her properly. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I've shown a shameful conduct to a little lady." "A shameful conduct? A shameful conduct?" She couldn't understand why he reacted like that as he hadn't done anything. What the hell was he thinking? What a strange and funny person he was to have such a reaction just by thinking about it. "I didn't think I'd do anything with my face because I've come here as an investor today. You're running around all by yourself, so I want to bother you." And it seemed rather easy for her to control him than to make unnecessary words. Celine held her tea and drank it. "I'm so sorry, but what business do you have with me?" "Oh, no big deal. I'm here to return what I received." "What you received?" If his store had been insignificant, she might have just gone back, but she confirmed that it wasn't. He looked like she could make use of him. Celine put the box on the table. "This. I don't think it's appropriate for me to wear." Burboom opened a familiar box that he had seen somewhere. What was inside was a cravat made of high-quality silk. It was like a gift to an unnamed investor, calling himself A. After looking at it for a long time, he asked Celine with a stupid face. "Why are you showing me this?" He was still unable to grasp the situation. Celine thought he would have a good intuition, but he didn't seem to have any keen sense. Celine, who took out the cravat herself from the box, approached Burboom, who sat on the other side. His eyes were fixed around his neck. At the sudden arrival of Celine, he swallowed a tense, dry saliva. "It's not me, but Baron Burboom, who fits in." Celine reached out to Berboom's neck. As Celine's fine, white hand approached, the Baron's body hardened. What was unavoidable, however, was his sheer fascination in Celine's gaze. Her appearance, which he could not believe was only 15, made it all the more so. Lady. Wait a minute. Celine moved her hands a few times and the cravat was detached from Berboom's neck. It was a very familiar gesture, as if it had been done many times. Whenever Celine's hands brushed against the tip of his chin, he could not control himself, as if he had been struck by lightning. Nevertheless, he held his breath to see if his nose could reach Celine's fine hands. That's a refreshing response. It doesn't suit your age. It was a lot of fun to recall that she had been swayed by Asher recently. So she thought she could play a little while pretending to be naive, as she had done to Oscar, but she decided not to do so. Unlike Oscar, Berboom seemed to be obeying himself like a slave even if she didn't do anything. I don't have to feed too much to the man who would give his life to me. Anyway, these kinds of people made their own food even though she did not do anything. Celine, who hung a new cravat around his neck, returned to her seat without regret. Berboom, who was like he was possessed by something, fidgeted about his neck without saying a word. It also seemed to find the warmth of Celine that could not remain. Baron, do you have your next move in mind? Yeah. A sudden question broke his silence, and he asked back with a broken face. I think the trend of perfume is going to last quite a while, but you should be prepared for the next one. Unlike essential consumer goods, it's goods that they would not have any problems with even if it's not there. Of course, if you're satisfied with this, there's nothing more to say. Celine spoke based on what she had studied and experienced for the time being. Berboom answered quickly at her testy tone of voice. Well, there's something else I've wanted to do from before. It's about lowering prices by lightening the concentration of the perfume. Its effect as a perfume is insignificant, and it only has a very light fragrance, but I'm sure there will be a demand for the common people. Chapter 106. It could be used as an alternative to perfume. There's a small problem with the scent flying away in an instant, but I think so, too. It was a pretty good answer. With no backpacks, it was better for him to gather more money than doing business with some nobility. Do you think you'll succeed? Yes, I'm sure I will. Ordinary people are always envious of the lives of the nobility. The content is different, but I think it will create the illusion that they are using the perfume used by the nobility. Besides, she liked that confidence. When she talked about business, his stupid eyes had disappeared. He was a person with good talent. One thing, if she pointed to the drawbacks. That's a good idea. But when someone asks you, if you say it in detail, you'd be bankrupt. His weakness was that he was making all the fuss about his business items, no matter how much he liked someone. It might have been an attempt to win favors, but it was very dangerous. Then, he hurriedly made an excuse, saying, I've never done this as usual. Really? Then why do you now? Berboom's face turned red again when she asked the question as if she knew nothing. With his reaction, Celine had a smile on her face. She deliberately flickered her long, rich eyelashes and smiled, and the pupils of Berboom were shaking blankly. Then I'll try to believe that. Celine got up from her seat because she was done with her business. There was no way to check out if he did not behave like that at other times, and there was no need to talk more about it. Berboom rose from his seat in a hurry, following Celine. It was refreshing for him to repeat his stupid behavior as if the adolescent boy had fallen in love for the first time. It felt like she became a normal girl. Unfortunately, it would never happen in the past or even now. Before leaving the lounge, Celine added a word for the Baron, who still did not realize her identity, without a keen notice. And for the next gift, it would be good if it's a perfume, not a cravat. I'm an investor, but I haven't used the product yet. I'd like to have the perfume that Baron Berboom would personally pick and give me. While looking foolishly at the traces of Celine, who had left behind a rich scent of her seductive perfume, he recalled the meaning of the words Celine had left. I'm an investor, but I haven't used the product yet. Investor. Only then did Burbum, who realized that Investor A was referring to Celine's A, hasten to chase the remnants of Celine. Since for a long time, he had stood stupidly, and Celine was about to leave the store with Annie, who had joined without his knowledge. Wait a moment, please. Burbum called Celine up in a hurry. Everyone looked back at him except Celine, who had deliberately ignored it, because it was a very loud voice. Burbum hurried to chase the unstoppable Celine, and fortunately, he was able to catch up to her before she was completely out of the shop. I didn't know about you and I made an excuse. Please forgive me. Burbum apologized to Celine without no reason. The reason was that he had misunderstood Celine for a man at will and that he had been so bewildered by her appearance that he couldn't understand her words. Celine, with a generous heart, nodded a little, and Burbum's expression brightened even more. Can you wait a minute? I'd like to give you the perfume I made as a gift. Oh my, I'm sorry, but I've already bought some perfume. Annie stepped into the conversation without keen notice and lifted the wrapped package close to her chest. It was the perfume purchased with Celine's permission. There were 4 bottles in total, 2 of them for Jessica, and the other 2 for her. I'm sorry. It's my carelessness. Surprised by the purchase of the perfume, Burbum called a staff and ordered her to refund the purchased perfume and to bring the top-of-the-line perfumes wrapped by types. The perfume taken by the employee was soon returned to dozens of bottles of luxury packaging. Annie couldn't lift them alone, so they were divided and the 2 knights held it up. Burbum also gave a small bouquet of flowers to Celine and Annie. It seemed to be a bouquet of flowers prepared for the VIP. Not one kind, but all sorts of flowers exhaled their own fragrance, pleasing to the sense of smell. Miss, who the hell is this gentleman? Celine was asked a question, but Annie's eyes were on Burbum. The stars were twinkling in the eyes of Annie that had never been treated like this before. Celine replied with a smile on her face since Annie seemed to look like she had met a prince. Oh, he's a businessman with a promising future. He's Baron Burbum. That's too much compliment. Next to the surprised Annie was the startled Burbum. Although they were surprised, they were too responsive to small things, and the pair matched very well. Burbum asked Annie, "What's your name, lady?" "La lady?" Annie was surprised and blushed even though he asked her a question out of courtesy. She seemed to be pondering on how to introduce herself. It seemed whether she should correct his words as a maid, or she could just answer as she was. So Celine made the decision in person. "It's Annie. She's my precious child." "Oh, I see. Your eyes are very beautiful." Me? Are you sure?" "Yes. You are very beautiful." Despite the fact that those words were obviously empty, Annie swept away her already neat hair over and over again. Since then, Burbum brought up useless topics such as books and colors since he didn't want Celine to leave, but the meeting ended with Celine's cold farewells. In this world, how could there be such a wonderful gentleman? In the carriage back to the mansion, Annie's eyes were still twinkling as if she was dreaming. She let out the praises for Baron Burbum as if she were a small bird that lit the morning. Celine gave her an appropriate response. Annie became enthusiastic, referring to his hair and skin color. "Did you like him that much?" "Of course. I've never seen such a great man." Baron Burbum and Annie. It wasn't a bad combination. Annie was a child, who needed to elevate her status, and Baron Burbum was a man she could raise and support. It was clear that if Annie and Baron Burbum were to be linked, Celine and Baron Burbum would be in a very close relationship that couldn't be cut off easily. It would also be a good example for others. But that was only possible if Baron Burbum was interested in Annie. Celine would try to connect them together as much as possible, but it might be difficult if Baron Burbum's reaction was not good enough. If Annie didn't mind, of course, Celine would connect Annie to him even if he didn't like Annie. It seemed like she could convince and persuade him with a little bit of coaxing words. Celine hoped Annie would play very well. When they arrived at the mansion, the 2 knights with dozens of perfumes asked Celine, "Miss, shall we move them all to your room?" "No, leave them all on the first floor's hall." "And will you call all the maids in the mansion?" Annie, who was still grinning, stiffened herself. She seemed to have expected what Celine would do, thanks to her quick wits. Miss. You're not going to give them to everyone, are you? That's what I'm going to do. Celine's answer, which betrayed Annie's expectation, was firm. Then Annie shook her hands like a fallen leaf that was about to rustle. Annie burst into tears and said, "You know how expensive these are, but are you going to hand these out?" "Annie, you know one thing, but you don't know the other," Celine said, glancing at Annie. It was like the look of a little devil trying to tell a child what was evil. "What's the advantage of having a lot of perfume?" "That's. I can decorate myself." "Then what are you going to do with your decoration?" "Yes. That's." If anyone enjoyed the satisfaction of decorating and grooming themselves, Annie found it enjoyable, so she could show herself to someone else. It was her habit to go around the mansion and boast herself to everyone every time she got something from Celine. But today was different. Seeing her face flushed, unlike before, when she had run excitedly, she might have thought of Baron Burnham this time. Chapter 107. Celine asked again, "Then if you share all the perfume with other maids in the mansion and you have nothing, what should you do?" "If I don't have, I should buy it again, right?" "Where?" "Of course, from Baron Bourbon's shop." "Huh." Only then did Annie's eyes glisten again since she found an answer. "Wouldn't it better for you without the perfume, because if you have a lot of perfume, you won't have to go again?" Of course, with that, it was Annie who would be happy the most. She would be able to meet the great Baron Bourbon that she had been praising so much just now. Yes. Annie nodded, shining her eyes. "And now I don't want to go there because I'm bothered. Try to buy the perfume in person, whenever you need it. You can buy it and credit it in my name." Are you sure? When did you see me flip over?" No. This would be the happiest moment of Annie's life. He was a wonderful man, and she could raise her status if she did well. Furthermore, Celine's support also played a part. And when Annie looked back on Celine's behavior, she didn't doubt that Celine would actively help her. Was there any better condition? "Miss. I'll gather the maids." Annie's voice was brighter and clearer than ever. "Yes, do it. Do you want me to hand them out because it's a hassle for you?" Annie was ready to destroy all the perfume if she could. Celine smiled and said yes, and Annie hurriedly disappeared into the mansion. Annie, who called in the maids of the mansion, handed the maids the perfume in a condescending manner. Even though Annie was arrogant and handed out the perfume, the maids were laughing at the precious gifts, and Celine's reputation for her kindness soared high into the sky. After a few days, Annie, who had borrowed Celine's cosmetics and decorated herself to the fullest, asked Celine, "Miss, I don't have any perfume left. Shall I go buy it?" Celine answered with an airy smile, "Yes, do it. How many bottles shall I buy?" "Do whatever you want. I won't get involved. Would you just care so that my perfume won't run out?" At Celine's words of leaving everything for her, Annie hurried to the busy street, excited. She had a sweet cake in her arms that she had just found throughout the capital. When she thought of eating it with Baron Bourbon, she felt like she was already flying above the sky. Arriving at Bourbon's shop, Annie headed straight to the counter. It was to find Bourbon. She snooped at the counter, recalling that he had come down from the second floor last time. Fortunately, no one was there, so she went over the counter and climbed the stairs that were behind it. "Where is he? I should have just asked a staff to show me around." It would have been easier if she had used Celine's name. Annie was forced to walk upstairs and open a few doors before she could find Bourbon's office. Annie, who found Bourbon, who was looking at the papers with concentration, hurried to apologize to him as if she had mistakenly come to the wrong place. "Oh my, I'm sorry. I got lost." All the perfumes were displayed on the first floor, so there was no reason to get lost on the second floor. But Bourbon welcomed her visit with open arms because he remembered Annie had been a companion to Celine. "I see. I've made a lady lose her way. I may have to change the structure." Annie's cheeks glowed with affection. Burbum led her to a sofa on the right side of the office and prepared tea to calm her lost and frightened mind. It was a simpler treatment than Celine's visit, but Annie was satisfied enough with it. In the first place, even though she was a commoner, he called her a lady and treated her politely. Burbum, of course, just called the title lady, because it didn't matter whether she was a noblewoman or not. I was about to buy a cake, and it's great. Annie handed the cake, and Burbum waved his hand with a surprised face. How can I get this precious thing? Why don't you have it with Lady Celine later? Of course, I've set aside Miss Celine's share. I bought this for extra money, so don't worry about it. The cake Annie gave him was put on the table when she said she had Celine's share. In fact, Annie was uncomfortable with one side of her heart since she had not prepared it separately, but she was able to erase it quickly because she had more joy than that. So she wanted to enjoy her tea for a while and enjoy the time with Burbum. However, he had just taken a sip of the tea without waiting for her to do it and asked her, "But why did you stop by here today?" I'd like to buy some perfume." "Are you talking about perfume?" Burbum cocked his head. Just recently, he had given her the perfume by types, but he was asking why she would buy them again. It was more than enough for her to use for years. Yes. Lady Celine gave them to the maids of the mansion. Miss always gives out what she has. When Annie spoke proudly, Burbum's expression was eerie. It seemed a bit awkward and annoyed that Celine had given someone the gifts he had given. At the same time, however, he was admiring Celine's character, which was different from rumors. And if I don't have any perfume, I can see Baron Burbum again. Annie blushed her cheeks. Her makeup was thick and slightly pinkish, but the color of the spring flowers matched well with the shy girl's face. It was enough to make the hearts of boys of her age cry. Annie wriggled her fingers and waited for Burbum's answer. Unable to look at the Baron, her gaze was fixed on the cake on the table. It was quite a courageous remark for her. "I see." After a moment of silence, he answered slowly. His voice was quivering fine. That alone made Annie feel how happy he was. So she looked up with a hopeful face, and, strangely, it was not Annie's place where his eyes touched. He looked as if he were looking somewhere far away. It was a look as if to see someone not here. I didn't know that Lady Celine thought so. She must have been very kind. What's more, she wanted to come back to see me again. Burbum was very deluded. It was Annie, not Celine, who had wanted to see him. He didn't seem to have any interest in Annie, so he didn't seem to have thought of that possibility at all. So, when did she say she'd visit again? At the same time that Burbum's face turned red, Annie's face cooled down. Spring flowers withered and became frosty snowflakes in winter, and the stars that twinkled in her eyes suddenly disappeared, leaving only thick darkness. Annie didn't think he'd pay attention to herself from the beginning, but she didn't think he'd pay attention to Celine. Doesn't he know what position Miss Celine has? Celine and Burbum did not match. Although she was of humble origin, Celine was the daughter of Count Vermont. She wasn't a lady who he dared to covet. Therefore, Annie thought he would match her, a commoner. So she forced herself to smile. "I think it'll take a while. I think I'll be visiting for a while." "Really? Is it worth it?" "She's a busy lady." Burbum, who was in a delusion, was still genuinely pleased. If she said Miss Celine was not interested in him, would his expression be able to remain? She was sure it would not. Somehow, she went back to the mansion with a chill in her heart. Her hands were filled with the perfume he had given her. They were even a few bottles, but why were they so heavy? Her feet were so heavy that she wondered if they were going to go under the ground. Annie's step stopped in front of Celine's room. She had to report because she had gone out. Annie, who had agonized in front of Celine's room for a long time, eventually failed to overcome her duty and knocked on the door and raised her voice. Unlike when she had left, Annie returned with a dull face, and Celine welcomed her with a mother's heart. "What happened that it makes you look so sad?" "Miss." Annie swallowed her words she wanted to tell. "The man I showed interest in for the first time seems to like you." Since Celine was the only one who could make her happy, both now and in the future. Chapter 108. Barry, bring us warm tea. Thanks to Celine's care, Annie was able to hold the tea to melt her cold heart. Even though it didn't really melt her heart, she felt much better about being able to get a hold of something. Celine, with a strange smile, looked at Annie for a moment. Celine looked like she knew everything. As Annie shrank in that glance, Celine said, holding her hand, "Annie, you can't be mistaken. You're not that stupid, are you? Yeah? You don't like Baron Bourbon, but you like his background. You won't be happy if you try to have his heart." Annie's eyes were dazzled because she could not grasp Celine's intention. So Celine changed the question. "If he had been a humble commoner, would you have been interested?" "Oh, no. So you have to set aside Baron Bourbon and his background. He just has a background that will make you happy. There are so many friendly and kind men in the world. But few men are going to make you rich and happy." Celine seemed to be already seeing what had happened between Bourbon and Annie. It was more like sending Annie to him with anticipation. Still, Celine hoped Annie would overcome it, like the past, present, and future Celine herself. By blocking her mind before she got hurt, you would choose any means and a way for her purpose. "So you should try so that I can help you, Miss." Clever Annie seemed to understand Arya. Afterward, for the first few days, Annie seemed a little depressed, but she soon regained her vigor. Then she began to visit the Bourbon's shop again, which she had not been there for a while. She seemed to have an ulterior motive to show her face often. Today, he even served snacks himself. Of course, it didn't taste good because there was no sugar in it, but I was so happy about it, though. "Good for you, Annie. Baron Bourbon seems to be a brusque man, so I think it's quite advanced." Celine added a little caution so that she would not suffer the same grief as in the past, and Annie no longer showed a sad face. She was a smart girl, as her goal was firm. "It was just because of my face that he was interested in anyway." So Celine hoped Annie would win the heart of Bourbon with more sincerity than this. In the past, the face alone hadn't lasted very long. Besides, they really looked quite close as they often saw each other as Annie's wish. Even though Celine didn't know the details because she didn't see Baron Bourbon anymore, but according to Annie, it was so. Anyway, it was smooth. There were some people who could be called allies compared to the past, and she dealt with Lyra's mischievous acts with determination. She also began making a new investment in Baron Bourbon and was introduced to other businessmen by the Baron at his youth business group meeting. And what she liked most about this moment was that the servants and maids of the mansion only treated her with special treatment. It was during dinner time with everyone when she realized that. Why did the dressing suddenly taste so good? As Celine cocked her head at the taste of the sweet sauce, she saw Lyra sitting opposite her putting the salad plate aside. "I can't eat the salad until the sugar is supplied back. The dressings don't fit too much. I got a little sugar and put it in, but it still tastes like this. It must have been lacking. I thought I got it right." As expected, there is a limit to what people can get with someone else's hands. "We're pressuring His Highness now, so we'll get an answer sooner or later." Celine could feel that their food and hers tasted different because even the Count removed the salad. Celine smiled secretly with that. They were very cute. They changed their attitudes just because she had given them a few bottles of perfume. It might be because they had never received a gift from the Vermont family before. There had been no need to give gifts to them who were paid the fair salaries in the first place. The family might have done it if they were the people, and they had to look good. However, the nobles didn't have to be seen good to mere servants and maids. After emptying the salad, which had been edible for a long time, Celine glanced behind. Some good smell seemed to come from the servants and maids, who were waiting without expression. She couldn't conceal her joy as if they were on her side. Celine felt like summer was passing by, just like in the past. In a little more time, the supply of luxury goods would begin, and the taste of the food would return. The nobles who wanted to get back to their original lives would pay huge sums of money for them. It was when Celine, who imagined this and sent letters and perfume as gifts to the young ladies in Corinne who she could not meet for the whole summer, was indulging in reading, enjoying refreshments and leisure. As she looked out of the window, the mansion seemed to be a bit cluttered, and she saw Lane, who had unexpectedly said that he would never visit again. Why the hell? Why did he visit when he didn't have to come? She went to the first floor because she had wondered that even a letter about the meeting had not come for the time being. The first thing that came into her eyes was Lyra and her maids, who laughed in a big smile. Lane, who confirmed Celine, said delightedly. There was Lady Celine, too. I just had a gift for you. A gift? As he beckoned, a very tall servant appeared with a large box. She didn't understand why the servant covered his face with a hood, but she ignored it and asked Lane about the contents of the gift. What is this? It's no big deal. It's a small gift from my master to Lady Celine. Summer is coming to an end soon. It was a pretty big box for a small gift. It was too big for a woman to lift alone. What on earth did he send, though it would be Asher as if he were his master? While Celine was agonizing, one of Lyra's maids bragged about Lyra's gift, even though she was not asked. Miss, where on earth did he get all this sugar and honey? It must have been quite expensive. The present that Asher sent to Lyra seemed to be sugar. As Lyra had left the box open, Celine found quite a bit of sugar to be seen from afar. It must have been hard to get, as the maid said. Why on earth did he send so much sugar to Lyra? Is Lyra still worthwhile for him to make use of? Celine felt a little upset and tried to go up to the room without showing it off as much as she could, but Lane ordered the tall servant to move the gift. I'll take it to your room. It's pretty heavy. Do it. I don't know what it is, but thank you. Celine checked his face to see how Asher was doing, why the meeting was not held, and whether there was anything else to do, but Lane only smiled as he checked Lyra's regards. Lyra also smiled sweetly at Lane, who came in a long time. Since it's been a long time, why don't you have tea? Thank you. Celine went up to her room without regret after seeing the two disappearing into the lounge. The servant with a large box followed. When she saw him climbing up the stairs with a large box, he seemed unusual. He put down the box in one of Celine's room when he arrived and headed for the door without saying goodbye, without permission. She was about to click her tongue in his ill manner, and the servant closed the open door, rather than going out. What? As it was unexpected, Celine stood back and asked. Her tongue twisted in embarrassment. The servant turned toward her before Celine added anything. What an awful thing this is. When she was about to get angry, Celine could do nothing when she saw his face exposed through the slowly peeling hood. That was because it was a familiar face she knew. Mr. Asher? It's been a long time. The identity of the servant was surprisingly Asher. Why did he come up the stairs with a box, leaving a proper way? Celine, relieved that he wasn't a complete stranger, swept her heart away. What brings you here? Chapter 109. It was a subtly sharp tone. This was why there were so many emotions mixed up. There was also a feeling of blame. In an unfriendly response, Asher smiled and approached Celine. I don't know, actually. I haven't seen you in a long time. I thought I'd have to meet you. Also, I couldn't hold a meeting for some reason. What? Surprised by his overly straightforward way of talking, Celine stepped back. However, the wall touched her back because she had already reached its limit. Asher, approaching her stride, stopped at a distance. It was only because it was Celine's room. Celine could not help but blush as she pondered what he had said during the course of the stillness. Is there a woman who won't be blushed at the man's remark that he came to see her? Any cold-blooded woman would blush for a moment. I was also worried that you would have no trouble eating. But a moment later, the words from Asher's mouth were enough to make Celine's hot face cold in a flash. Trouble eating? Do you mean the thing you gave to Lyra as a present? She wondered if he visited her while he gave that sugar as a gift to Lyra. Is it not Lyra, who you are worried? Isn't it Lyra who received the gift? When she asked him why he said that to her, Asher asked with a puzzled look. No way, don't misunderstand. Misunderstanding? The sugar I gave Lady Lyra was just to meet you. That way, I can buy time, like this. Perhaps because of the embarrassment of misunderstanding, Celine's face turned red again, and Asher's mouth was going up slowly. Did it bother you? Because I sent the sugar to Lady Lyra? That's... It would be a lie to say that it didn't bother her. His connection with Lyra had started from misunderstanding, but Celine was still concerned about why he still sent Lyra a gift. It was all the more so to think that it was Asher. Yeah. Celine answered frankly. It seems to be jealous if I deny it, isn't it? But it was also strange to say that it was nerve-wracking. It was over if she thought that there was a reason or that he was no longer interested in Lyra. But she was nervous. In addition, there was even a slight irritation about Asher. It was like Lyra watching her who had received Oscar's gift. Why on earth? She had met him only a few times. He had made her experience something as strange as today whenever he had met him. But why? Unlike Celine, whose shyness reached the limit of her incomprehensible emotions, the corners of Asher's mouth were drawn good all the time. Huh, I see. The tone of Asher's speech was very soft. He also looked more friendly than any other expression she had ever seen. He kept his face for a moment and examined Celine's complexion. It was as if she was new to his eyes because he had not seen her for a long time. So, as they spent a quiet time, Lane's voice came from outside the door. It was an urging voice. It seems that time is up. The next meeting will take some time. Unfortunately, I have a little bit of a problem. It's hard to get out like this. I'll contact you as soon as I have a schedule. I see. After finishing his speech, he examined Celine's face for a while, but when Lane said there was no time, he left his regret behind and finally disappeared. Did you really miss me? Why did you want to see me? Is it just because you haven't seen me for a long time? While agonizing alone for a long time, Jessica knocked on the door. When she made an indication, Jessica came in with a teapot in her hand. It was not her job anymore. Nevertheless, Jessica put it on the table with a very bright face. I brought it because I heard sugar came in. You like sweet tea. They are making a cake now, and I'll bring it as soon as it's finished. She had to feel bad because Lyra had been given the gift, but it made her feel better, thinking that it had been actually a way to meet her. She wondered if she could feel better so easily. Oh my, miss. What's this big box? When Jessica noticed the box in the corner, she asked in surprise. I got a present. Come to think of it, she had been embarrassed, so she didn't even open the gift yet. Jessica unpacked the box, to her discretion. Oh, my God. What are all these? When Celine checked inside beside Jessica, who was so frightened that she couldn't shut up, there were colorful dresses and ornaments that she had never seen before. Where the hell am I going to wear this fancy dress? She would surely attract the attention of people at once, everywhere she went. And at the same time, I'll be a target with such envy and jealousy. Unless she was a member of the imperial family or was at the pinnacle of power, such a colorful and conspicuous dress would be poisonous. Nevertheless, laughter came out. She thought it might be an atonement for discriminating against Lyra. A soft smile hung on Celine's lips. The gift from Asher was kept in the dressing room as a box. She didn't think she'd be able to wear it anywhere else, and she was afraid that it would be ruined when she took it out and kept it exposed. His luxurious gifts were kept so quietly like that. The evil Lyra baked cakes and cookies with the sugar she had received and handed them out to Celine, as if it was mercy, and said at every meal, "I'm glad the food tastes so good." The Count and the Countess were delighted to hear her words and answered with an appropriate response. By the way, who in the world is Mr. Lane's master? I can't believe he got this much sugar. Well, I don't know, either. At least I don't think there's anyone among the people I know. If the Count had known him, this sugar would have been first handed down to the family of the Duke of Frederick, not to the family of the Count of Vermont. For them, the first priority was the Duke's. Although she did not participate in the conversation, Celine also imagined the identity of Asher with them. Well, if that's the case. Is he a close aide of the crown prince? It was a pretty sharp guess. If he had this much money and connections, he would not be a normal figure, but if the count of the aristocratic party did not know, he was more likely to be a close aide of the crown prince. Of course, even so, the broad-footed count would know all the crown prince's close aides, but it was fair to think that he was not a member of a group with close ties to the count anyway. The count replied in agreement with that. I think it's most likely, but maybe not. However, because the Vermont family belongs to the aristocratic party, there was no way that a close aide to the crown prince would continue to send gifts to Lyra. Is it so, aren't I? I guess I've had too much speculation. In the end, measuring the identity of Asher, as Celine had done, failed. Had it been easy to see, it was clear that Celine, who had encountered him several times, would have noticed it first. I must ask who he is the next time I meet him. Asher had known her identity in advance and sent a man, but until several times she had met him, she only didn't know his identity. Apart from her good feeling to him, she should have grasped his identity. That was what she once thought of as the most, who had experienced the past once. She made herself a promise that the next time she met him, she would find out who he was, even if she turned over the hourglass or follow him. Time passed quickly, summer ended, and autumn was in full swing. In a little more time, severe winter would come. In the meantime, luxuries dispensed by the lower aristocrat in Pannonia province were supplied to the market. Other aristocrats were still waiting for customs procedures, so he went on to monopolize. Because Celine had unleashed sugar only in the Flower Mountain, there was panic buying, on the fear that the goods that had come in might disappear at any time. Thanks to this, a large number of luxury goods, including sugar, began to be accumulated in the mansions of the majority of the nobility. It was a little different from the past. Chapter 110. Celine clicked her tongue by the window of her room to watch the luxuries carried by the servants. Plenty of spices began to pile up in the mansion of Count Vermont. The warehouse was filled with a few bags of sugar and was most commonly used, followed by honey or pepper. Does the count think we need that much amount? Will he be in trouble if a large quantity of supplies is released? It was quite possible because he was walking on a different path from the past. The lower aristocrat must have accumulated a great deal of wealth already, so he might think it would be better to pull out his feet. Of course, pulling out of his feet at this point would cause a huge spike in luxury goods, but he wouldn't mind since he had already wrecked the market. Miss, I'll bring some letters to you. Celine was still imagining how the future would change, and she heard a knock on the door. When she answered to come in, Annie showed up with a few letters in her hand, with a still bright face. Today. Those are from Baron Burboom. He said they were the ones he mentioned last time. And there are so many other letters, too. As he had promised, he had introduced promising young businessmen to her from summer. Celine, who still didn't know much about business, chose a businessman to invest in, thinking about what things and businesses were going to be like in the future. Most of the things she remembered, who had had little interest in business in the past, were very unlikely to fail because most of the items that would be fashionable were in the social world. Even if some of the projects that were accidentally invested in were destroyed, it would be clear that the others would be revived and she would not lose much. Moreover, some businesses had been already gaining momentum as soon as she had started to invest. Young businessmen were quick in action. As soon as they had received the investment, they had started or expanded their businesses and began to gain recognition a little faster than in the past. Ignorant of the future, they expressed infinite gratitude to Celine for investing in their unsteady businesses, and would occasionally send long letters that were hard for her to read. Furthermore, some people had misunderstood that thing had begun to work out thanks to Celine's investment. They were businesses that would work well someday, although they might take some time even if they did not receive investment. They are supposed to be like that. It was the privilege of the person who had turned over the hourglass. Celine relied upon a letter to invest. After selecting some of the most impressive businessmen like Baron Burboom was introduced to herself. What better way to sit back and make money and gain power? Moreover, the anonymous investor, who would invest large sums of money on the basis of possibility, had already been the subject of respect, envy, and attention to young aristocrats. Perhaps, in a little more time, it might be rumored that those who had been selected by Celine would have a great success. Who knows? If it works out that way, I'll create a force comparable to the aristocratic party. People would gather to a person with plenty of money. And there would be a loyal one to the person who would give mercy and support them. Even if it turned out that it was all the work of a wicked woman, she would be honored as a saint, not as a wicked woman anymore. If that happened, the one who was known to have been bullied by a wicked woman so far might become a wicked woman. They would say that she made false rumors to defame the saint. So Celine fired all her tutors. They were the women hired for a trial tasting anyway, and because she was creating larger connections than those, and they were no longer useful. And in order to take advantage of the 3 wives, I must have ties to their sons. Somehow she felt a strange sense of guilt. It wasn't a guilty mind for wives and their sons. The target for the guilty mind was none other than Asher. Without knowing why, whenever she met the wives and her tutors, she felt bad because the face of Asher came up to her mind continuously. That allowed her to fire the wives without regret. Did I do something wrong? Do you think I was going against you? Then please, forgive me. When Celine said she would fire her, Viscountess Serby pleaded with tears. It was a natural result because the fish she had thought she had almost caught declared that it would run away to the sea. Celine shook her head coldly and reminded Viscountess Serby of her incompetence. No, I just want to learn more. I think your knowledge is limited. I don't have to waste my time. The wives pleaded with Celine several more times, but at last, they felt their own incompetence and had to shed tears and leave the mansion. It used to be a tearful scene, but now it was the past. It would be better for her to clear up the useless so quickly. It won't be long before a wicked woman becomes a saint, and a saint becomes a wicked woman. Her heart leaped as she imagined the glorious future. The characters were crushed with force in the hand that wrote a reply letter. But they became rather a strong handwriting and filled the letter. It was clear that it would leave a strong impression on the minds of young businessmen who would receive letters. I'm sorry I'm late, Lady Celine. I really want to meet you because I haven't seen you for a long time. The Marquis, too. It was not long before Celine's 16th birthday that she got a letter from Corinne. Corinne talked about the meeting after 2 seasons as if she had been busy in preparation for next year's engagement and the education to be the Marquise. There was no reason to refuse her, so Celine replied right away that she knew it, and the schedule was quickly set. It was a very close day if it was left out in advance. Celine, not too much stylish, headed for the mansion of the Marquis. Celine had remained up all night wondering how the Marquis who had earnestly wooed to Corinne would greet her. Miss, we have arrived. Please get off. Celine arranged her dress as the voice was heard from outside the carriage. She checked and checked with Jessica who sat on the other side many times if she was okay. Then a relieved Celine nodded. The carriage door slowly opened. It was time to check the results of the long work. Welcome to the mansion of the Marquis, Lady Vermont. Celine, who was walking to get off the wagon, stopped moving. As usual, she had thought the butler of the mansion, or Corinne would have come out to meet her because the person who greeted her was a very unexpected one. Are you all right? Oh, I'm okay. The Marquis of Vincent with a very worried face laid his hand on Celine. It seemed to mean holding his hand and slowly getting off. The knight who had been trying to escort her took a step back, and Celine's hand, which trembled a little, held the hand of the Marquis of Vincent. Contrary to rumors of being blunt and cold, he was embarrassingly polite and kind. It was Corinne who welcomed Celine off the wagon after the Marquis, and who would guarantee her future. Lady Celine, you had a hard time coming. Lady Corinne. Corinne seemed to have been really busy, and she had lost a little weight. Due to the thinness of her face, Celine could find the maturity from Corinne, which had been lacking. Corinne and the Marquis of Vincent seemed to have worked quite hard to welcome Celine. It was like they had come out to meet Celine in person and waited, having split their busy time, and so did the servants and maids who treated her politely. It was also the case with a parade of luncheon meetings set up with rare materials that were not easily seen. Before the main menu came out, the Marquis of Vincent asked Celine, I don't know if you love this food. Of course, I love it. I'm so glad you love it. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for preparing such good food. All food was fit for her mouth as if they had prepared it after grasping her taste. Corinne was laughing when she saw Celine and the Marquis exchanging conversations. The friendly conversation between the person she loved the most and the girl she cherished with each other was unparalleled happiness for her. Chapter 111. As I told you before, the handkerchief you have is one of the pair which Lady Celine has. They were handkerchiefs made to celebrate Lady Celine's birthday. Ah, you mean the handkerchief that connected me to Lady Corinne. The eyes of the Marquis of Vincent answering Corinne was very friendly. He really fell in love with Corinne. The eyes of the Marquis of Vincent, who returned to Celine, were also filled with kindness. He seemed not to care about Celine's rumors, which were circulating in the public. I really thank you very much, said the Marquis, smiling softly. Facing the face from the front, Celine stiffened herself. Have I ever been treated so warmly by someone I met for the first time? This friendly, tender look was strange to Celine, who had lived in anxiety as she had always walked on thin ice. She had always imagined and drawn such a response, but when she faced it, she found that a stunned feeling, rather than joy, stormed her. She had vowed to laugh as hard as she could. However, the never-experienced moment confused her. Celine. When Celine's face, which had always smiled brightly, became dark, Corinne, who was embarrassed, asked her, "What's the matter?" The Marquis also alternately looked at Celine and Corinne with a look of concern that he might have made some mistakes. Celine raised her head and faced two pairs of eyes that sent a worried light toward her. She had just thought of them as a platform to use. The situation was more difficult than she had thought, as the unfamiliar feelings that she had never experienced before rushed into her. However, she could not continue to cry. Celine, who had straightened her face soon, raised her mouth to create a smiling face. Unlike her usual seductive smile, it was a little awkward today. I really want you two to be happy. It was awkward, but her smile, which was so pure and clean, was a heartfelt smile that Celine had never been able to express. The Marquis of Vincent treated Celine as kindly and affectionately as Corinne, as if to share the thoughts and feelings of Corinne. Even if she was close to Corinne, she was the only foreign object of the family of Count Virmont. They tried their best not to let Celine suffer any inconvenience in their mansion, so Celine had to accidentally feel a great deal of emotion, like feelings of an unnecessary guilty mind. But those feelings had been forgotten in just a week. Compared to the pain and unhappiness of Celine, and the path she had to walk to survive in the future, the slightest emotion was smaller than the dust that flew in the air. So she could get rid of it. Those little things won't help me in my life anyway. Celine spent her birthday with that kind of heart. After 15, she became 16 before she was aware. It was the second 16th birthday that was different from the past. On her birthday, Corinne was so busy that she just showed her face and returned. Therefore, Celine spent her birthday with the young ladies, who she couldn't even remember their names. Just in case, she had sent a letter to Oscar, but naturally, he didn't show up. It was heartless to say that there was no reply. And an anonymous and colorful gift arrived before Celine, and the contents contained a tulip flower that did not wither well, so that it could be easily measured that who sent it. Especially, unlike last year's birthday when there had been a band, it was so simple that Lyra, who had shown up with a bouquet of flowers and ruined the atmosphere, didn't care. Celine was behind the scenes when the princess revealed her intention to attend the birthday party of Lyra, which would be just after Celine's birthday. Of course, it was simple but full of passion because Celine had got favors from the servants and maids. Although the size of the visitors and the party was so simple that it was not up to anyone's mouth. Celine, however, did not think much, because it was still time to stay quiet. She was just a wicked woman, who could not reveal her true identity on the surface, although she might have the enthusiastic support of young aristocrats and businessmen behind her. It was an animal hiding in the grass with its sharp teeth hidden. "Are you sure you want to go down, miss?" Annie asked with a worried look. She was asking if Celine would really like to attend Lyra's birthday party, which was about to begin. Celine nodded. "I've received a formal invitation, so I'll have to attend." Even so. I don't think you should go, miss. No, I can't. Celine had a premonition that something very bad was about to happen, but she couldn't avoid it. It was better to know than not to know. That way, she could prepare for it. And Oscar might attend. Since he had participated last time and even the princess had said that she would attend this event, it was highly likely. Celine wanted to meet him face to face once again and have a conversation. She wanted to ask why he had broken up with her so simply. In order to keep up with Lyra, she even used cosmetics that she had never used before. The addition of color to her lips and bringing life to her cheeks reminded her of the past, the days she had always tried to make herself gorgeous and to get some attention. But the end had been the evil woman of misfortune all along. Even the only pretty face, which had been better than Lyra, had been poisoned to her. There had been countless curses for a pretty woman of humble origin. Oh, my God. The prostitute's daughter is attending now? Yeah, the prostitute's daughter had been a nickname that had been called more than a name. Come to think of it, she attended last year, didn't she? She is stupid and even had no keen sense to read the situation. Oh, poor Lady Lyra. Sometimes there is such a foolish girl. It's something that's not worth being born. Those who gathered in the hall were ready to curse Celine for Lyra. No, they were already spewing curses at Celine in a plausible manner. Annie, who was at the back, whispered to Celine in a very low voice. Oh, my God, their mouths are no different than a trash can. Miss, don't mind. Don't worry. I don't care at all. Celine snorted and took a sip of her drink. The alcohol-free champagne tickled down the roof of her mouth and throat. The eyes of everyone in the hall swept through her body. There was a mixture of complex and subtle feelings in those eyes. However, her absolute beauty attracted people's attention. Celine kept her chin up even though she heard voices that were insulting her. However, there was no need to shout or use an arrogant figure like in the past to give them any chance to blame her. Celine, who drew everyone's attention in the hall where the main character was away, took the place of Lyra. And she certainly thought so. Until Lyra appeared with Oscar. The moment Celine saw Lyra's bright smile that she had never seen before, Celine's blood became cold. It was a very bright smile, unlike her last birthday. No matter how pleasant Oscar's visit was, it was strange to laugh so gladly. It was as if she had everything in the world. Unfortunately, Celine's anxiety was right. As Oscar and Lyra arrived at the center of the hall, the Count and the Countess moved to the center. In addition, there was Princess Julia whom Celine had not seen in a long time. And with them was a woman that Celine was seeing for the first time. Who? It was a young lady that had just laughed at her but cleared Celine's curiosity. She put the woman's identity in her mouth with a very surprised look. Oh, my God, she's the Duchess. What is she doing here? The woman with a flamboyant fan seemed to be the Duchess of Frederick. It was only too a big shot to attend the birthday of the daughter of the family of Count Vermont at best. This added to Celine's anxiety. That was why Oscar and Lyra stood together in the center of the hall, and the representatives of each family gathered. They would not do so for no reason. Soon, on behalf of everyone, Julia opened her mouth. It's a little early, but I'd like to let all of you know first, who are here. Chapter 112. At the words, Celine's face hardened. No way. Celine gave a desperate look to her mother, who was the only one there on her side. But on purpose, her mother didn't make eye contact with Celine. The elegantly smiling face served only to bless the noble future of Lyra from the beginning of time. She didn't seem to care about Celine's desperate look. Julia continued her words, it's a little early, but we can't help it because they love so much. At Julia's words, Lyra laughed with a happy face. Celine's heart fell down. Why? Celine could predict what Julia was going to say without having to listen to what she was about to say. Celine's gaze suddenly turned to Oscar, who stood next to Lyra. Oscar fixed his eyes on his sister without making any facial expressions. Really, you've turned away? Celine tried to find it over and over again, but she had been constantly searching for other reasons for their sudden loss of contact because of her lingering attachment. She was assuming that it was because of Princess Julia. But that's really what Oscar wanted. If not, he would not be able to accept it, nodding through. Now she really needed to throw away the card of Oscar. What would she do if she held on to someone who had never looked at her in the past or even now? Nevertheless, she kept looking at Oscar's expression because he was the best card to hurt Lyra. When Lady Lyra becomes an adult, we are going to hold an engagement ceremony right away. I'm going to give her the ring of promise that is passed down to our family from generation to generation. Oscar moved at Julia's hand gesture. He took a small ring out of his arms. It was a diamond ring in the shape of a rose. It was also owned by the wife of the Duke of Frederick for generations. Lyra reached out her hand with a shy, red face. It was time for the Duchess of the Future to receive the ring. Celine couldn't bear to see it, so she got up from her seat. No one paid attention to a wicked woman's departure. No, except for one. Oscar's gaze followed Celine, who was climbing up the stairs. After he had arrived here, he had put her in his eyes. And when Lyra noticed this, she spoke to Oscar, who had stopped moving. What a pretty ring. I never dreamed I'd be wearing a promise ring. Oscar's hand, which had stopped, moved again. It was to put the ring of promise on Lyra's finger. There was nothing he could do about a future that was already set. Miss Celine. It was in the garden on the second floor that Celine moved her steps in defiance of Annie calling her name from behind, a garden created by the Countess with lofty tastes. And it was also a place where Oscar and Celine had memories of. Why did I come here? What on earth did he come here for? Well, it was time for her to let Oscar go perfectly. He would no longer return to Celine. He even announced his engagement to everyone. Oscar showed no interest in her, though she would be willing to be a foreign object if he showed her a wobbly look. Annie barely gasped for breath and said to Celine, who was entering the garden. Miss. Why don't you go back to your room? She blurted her words with concern because she was one of the few who knew Celine had exchanged letters with Oscar. Instead of going back, however, Celine sat on a chair in the garden. I'm sorry, can you get me some tea? Yes, miss. It wasn't her job to do that now, but Annie left the garden to prepare the tea without saying anything. Celine, who was alone, buried her face in her palms and hid her distorted face. She thought it would be terribly horrible for her face that she had decorated to show Oscar well. It was time to let him go perfectly. No, maybe that time had come a long time ago. It had been the right time when he had asked to cut off their contact. She had been in agony again because she had had regrets. There are a lot of other things, but only for Oscar. Now, there were many other cards besides Oscar. Of course, he was the best card to inflict the crushing pain on Lyra, but there was nothing more foolish than to keep chasing a card that she could not get. For a while, she cleared her mind by drinking the tea Annie had brought her. No one was looking for Celine for a long time even after Annie left as well. Celine rose from her seat as she stared at the scarlet sunset window. There was a loud noise through the stairs on the first floor, whether there were many people who had not yet returned, though it was late. After looking at it for a long time, she moved to the third floor where her room was. Her steps were as heavy as a stone, but every effort was made to quench the lingering mind. Then as she passed the last stairway and passed the hallway leading to her room, she could see something detached in front of her room. What is that? She noticed that it was a small box when she got close and checked. It was even packed as if it were a gift. Why is there a present in front of my room when it is Lyra's birthday? Celine picked up the box and tore the package. It was hers, as it was in front of her room. This. Celine's eyes opened wide when she saw the content. It was a rose-shaped brooch made of red diamonds. It was a very similar design to the brooch that Celine had previously given to Oscar. The color and the shape of the diamond were different, so she would not know when she set them apart, but if she put them side by side, she would definitely feel like they were matched. Why on earth and who did send this? The answer was fixed. It was obvious that Oscar had sent it. But why on earth would he do this? He hadn't even had eye contact with her. No one else would know about the brooch, so there was no way anyone else would have sent it. Why did he send such a brooch? Celine tumbled over the bed, agonizingly. The brooch in her hands sparkled in the glow of the sunset. She didn't know what he meant, but it was clear that he still had regret for her. Otherwise, he would not have sent her a brooch that needed to be crafted with such care. Yes, it makes no sense to stop ties so suddenly. It was clear that there had been a reason. The laughter that leaked out filled the empty room. Oscar and Lyra announced their engagement, but she felt as if she were flying. However, as time went by, her excited feelings came back gradually. Why did he just leave the gift behind, not looking at my face, not even a letter? It was better to reply to the letter than to leave the gift behind. Doesn't he know how nervous I was? He had made her so anxious, but he had only given her a gift like this. She just wanted to let him go today, who was the most useful card to use to cut off Lyra's head, but all of a sudden, he gave a gift. What the hell am I supposed to do? Are you trying to put your head in so that I can use it? Then she had to use it. Celine, holding the brooch in her hand, hurried downstairs. It was to check the face of Oscar, who had possibly sent it. Still, the first floor was noisy with the party celebrating Lyra's birthday. Everyone seemed to be talking about Lyra and Oscar's future when Celine heard the words, engagement, or adult, from time to time. Foolishly, he secretly sent a gift to another woman on his fiancée's birthday. As expected, the woman he had in mind was herself. Otherwise, that Oscar would not have sent a gift to another woman for his fiancée's birthday. Celine, standing at the foot of the stairs leading down to the first floor, looked for the trail of Oscar. Luckily, Oscar was sitting near the stairs. He was with Princess Julia, staring at the front with a stiff face that didn't go well with the birthday party. So Celine stopped trying to approach straight to Oscar and watched them for a while. No word was heard, but the princess was constantly talking to Oscar. As the conversation continued, Oscar's expression grew harder. What are they talking about? Chapter 113. Celine, who watched the two talk for a while, met eyes with Julia, who happened to turn her head. Hiding a look of surprise, Celine greeted Julia politely, and Julia replaced her answer with a cold look. It was a rude response, no matter how unnoticed it was, even the eldest daughter of the family of the Duke of Frederick. That's going to be her true self. Celine was not offended because she had already had that kind of reaction hundreds or thousands of times. On the contrary, she seemed to know her true self, so there came no laughter. And now she wanted to talk to Oscar more than that. In return, Oscar, who noticed his sister's cold face, turned his head to see where his sister's eyes were going. At the unexpected sight of Celine, Oscar solidified himself with a surprised face. Again, Celine greeted Oscar without losing her elegance. She added an alluring smile that had always thrown him into confusion and trials. It was also a reward for the birthday gift. It was a moment of wonder how he would react. The princess, who faced Celine's smile with Oscar, narrowed the middle of her brow to a point that it could not be seen. Should he blush? Or would he get out of his seat right now and come this way? The princess tapped Oscar's arm with a fan as Celine was expecting him to smile, at least because he had left a gift behind in front of her room. Then Oscar, who bit his lower lip, turned his head coldly from Celine, without showing any answer. The princess wiped her brother's cheek with a very benevolent and gentle smile, like a compliment. It happened very quickly. Why the hell? Celine couldn't do anything for a while because she had never dreamed of being ignored by Oscar at the time when she had even received a gift. It was cruel of him not to give her a small smile, no matter how close the princess was. After all, it was Oscar and the princess who left the seat first. He appeared to be leaving the mansion. Celine had been hardened on the stairs for a long time, but he had not given a single glance. It was the end of the loser. Celine bit her lips as soon as they left and returned to her room. How many times does he have to disappoint me? Finally, after returning to her room feeling miserable, Celine stared at the brooch in her hand. If he was going to ignore this, why did he send me this brooch? Because she felt as if she had been fooled by him many times, she was so angry that she raised her hand to throw it in her hand, and at the end of her gaze, her eyes reached the bright-colored flower. It was a tulip sent by Asher, the flower that had not been in the past. It had been quite a while since she had received it, but its freshness remained unchanged. When it caught her sight, she was now able to realize her own reality. Unlike in the past, she had been accomplishing many things. The tulip was one of them. When she thought so, she felt her anger chilled. Foolishly. I tried to use him, but was it me who was eventually used? Celine had only given Lyra great happiness. The engagement was only a matter of time, as Lyra had even got the ring, though 3 years were left until her coming of age. Lyra might marry him with an engagement at the same time. With her hatred of Oscar came the ugly face of Lyra, the main culprit of all this. Celine put strength to her hand which grabbed the brooch. The devilish bitch. If Lyra had left her alone, Celine would have grown up to be a satisfied girl with a fancy dress with ribbons and jewels. She would have lived a modestly complacent life and stupidly without wishing for any further rise in status. But what about the results? The past tidal waves came, and her vengeance against Lyra made her heart throb again. If I show Lyra this brooch, how will she take it? Yeah. That was a very good idea. It was clear that Lyra would recognize the identity of the brooch. She had been bragging about getting a brooch from Oscar, so she would be going to be upset. In addition, her faith in Oscar would also be cracked. Of course, the cracks would not easily destroy Lyra's one-sided love, but they would be placed deep in her heart, in the sense of doubt. Celine decided to put it into practice straight away. It was a very childish move, but for now, that was the only way to hurt Lyra. Such a trivial move would become a fatal dagger and settle in her heart as a pain. It was a precious and desperate experience that Celine had experienced in person in the past. And the date was very close. Celine decided to do it a few days later because it would only add to the image of the wicked girl if she did it now on Lyra's birthday. Celine, with a brooch on her chest, sat down at the table. As always, no one paid attention to her. Still, she did not shrink and sought the right time. Recently, the main topic of conversation was Lyra's engagement, so she listened quietly. So I thought it would be appropriate after Miss Julia marries. It may be nice. The crown prince needs to make a decision quickly. Oh, my God, then Julia, the crown prince's wife, will attend Lyra's engagement, right? And his highness, too. The countess spoke in superlatives with great surprise. Realizing that Celine no longer had a chance, she put all her heart into the future of Lyra. The engagement ceremony, blessed by the royal family, was significant. It would also help to build to save their face. In the first place, it meant that the marriage of the crown prince and the crown prince's party succumbed to the aristocratic party at the point of marriage. And Lyra was to enter into such a family's hostess. Somehow, he will attend, right? There must be many things to care about. You'll have to be the most beautiful bride in the world. Which designer should we call for your dress? It was decided that we'd be going to fix the dress the duchesses have worn for generations. It's been a while since you came to the family of Count Vermont, so I'm sure you don't know well. The Duke family's engagement and wedding ceremonies have been held like that for generations. Lyra's reply was so cold that the countess was embarrassed, who tried to pretend to know and prepare for the engagement. Lyra's face was full of smiles, but her tone reproached the ignorance of the countess. So the countess struggled to keep her smile on her face and asked again. Have you already decided to do that? Yes, the princess cares about it in many ways. Celine wanted to throw hot soup on Lyra's face, smiling brightly. But there was something to ruin her face much more effectively than hot soup. It was the brooch. Celine straightened her back and broke into the conversation with her heart wide open. I really envy you, Lyra. You'll definitely be the most beautiful bride in the empire. Thank you, sister. To Celine's sudden celebration, Lyra answered with an awkward face. It seemed that she didn't know Celine was going to get involved in this conversation. It was Celine who had been eating quietly for days without interrupting the conversation. And Lyra had also deliberately brought up topics that Celine could not step into. But it wasn't Celine who was still there. So you said that Oscar had given you a brooch before? Actually, not long ago, I also got a brooch as a present. She naturally changed the subject to Oscar's story. Since Lyra also had a precious brooch on her chest today, the conversation was very plausible. Everyone's eyes turned to Celine's chest. Rose, shape. The design is. Lyra's eyes trembled after checking the brooch. It's beautiful, isn't it? I think it's a red diamond. Her words of beauty were true, so the Count and the Countess expressed some interest. Each family's emblems, which embellished flowers, were often used as decorations, so they did not seem to think strangely. That was because they had announced Lyra's engagement just a few days ago. The Countess, who was always interested in jewelry, asked, "It looks pretty expensive. Who did you get it from?" "I don't know. It was in front of my room while I was away to attend Lyra's birthday party." Lyra's face turned pale when Celine hinted that she had received it from someone who had been also anonymous on Lyra's birthday. Chapter 114. Oh my God, is that one of the attendees? Maybe so. I guess he was here to deliver the gift he hadn't delivered on your birthday. I wished he would have revealed his name even though it was late. But wouldn't Lyra know the name of the man who had given this brooch? The mere look of her pale face revealed it. It had such a similar atmosphere to Lyra's brooch, which she was carrying on her chest every day. It's pretty. The bright energy faded from her face when Lyra checked the brooch. Her subsequent meal seemed to be going wrong smoothly. Lyra, who left more than half of her food, got up from her seat first, making an excuse that she was not feeling well. The Countess asked with a worried look, "Do you want me to call a doctor?" "No, I think I'll be fine with a little rest. I guess it's because I'm tired. Alicia, I hope you take good care of Lyra just in case." "Yes, I see." As soon as the Count's permission fell, Lyra, who hurried to her room, said to Alicia, who was about to follow her into the room, "Just leave me alone for a second." "Yes, miss." Since that was Lyra's first order after a long time, Alicia hurriedly looked around to see if anyone was present. A moment later, with the sound of something breaking in the room, Lyra's screams came and Alicia closed her eyes. "Miss." Worried about Lyra in such a panicky mood, Alicia entered the room with caution as soon as the room became quiet. Then, she hurriedly checked Lyra's condition. As usual, there was not a scratch on Lyra's skin and silky hair. So she began to put away the broken pieces first after being reassured. Alicia, by the time she was almost done, Lyra, who was quietly sitting on the sofa, called Alicia's name. Alicia, who gathered the pieces together, approached Lyra. "Yes, miss. What do I have to do?" "I'm in a very bad mood." It had been obviously an upsetting affair. It would have caused great anger for an ordinary woman, but what was from Lyra's mouth was that she was in a very bad mood. Lyra was a child who had to hide herself and had to blow off her anger. Alicia consoled her with her painful heart. "You're about to be the Duchess, so let your anger go. I'll take care of the wicked prostitute's daughter." Despite Alicia's consolation, however, Lyra could not ease her anger. It had been 2 years since the filthy girl had come into the family of Count Vermont, and Celine still carried her head up. And somehow, it seemed that Celine had stolen Oscar's heart. It had been unusual from the first meeting, but as the days and years had passed, something that had been worth worrying about had happened. For example, Oscar had taken the girl's handkerchief first, or he had visited Celine on her birthday. Most of all, from time to time he had paid his attention to the wicked girl with a dumbfounded look. And the brooch. No one would have been able to make such a brooch if it hadn't been for Oscar. The design and atmosphere resembled that of her brooch. The brooch seemed to fit in much more naturally than the brooch she had. She got help from Princess Isis, but she couldn't calm down because she felt Oscar and Celine were getting involved. Born a noble from the beginning of her life, she was not such a violent person who expressed her feelings, but after Celine's appearance, she had often let out an ugly side of her. She didn't like it either. What happened to the new maid attached to Celine? she seems to be working hard, but I don't think that bitch can easily open her heart. Barry had been such a clever girl that Alicia had believed she would do much better than Annie, who had been charmed by Celine, but it hadn't been as easy as Alicia had thought. Barry had not been able to escape from her chores until the dark night before sunrise. Barry said that she would have to clean the same place all day long without any time to report. Barry also said that Celine would find fault with her job, even though she had wiped the same spot again and again, and it was not only Celine that she needed to worry about. Annie and Jessica were also harassing her. Alicia, who was embarrassed when she recalled Barry, who was crying, blurred her words. I need to write a letter to the princess. Lyra asked Alicia to bring the letter, but Alicia stopped her. Miss, you've been writing to her for a long time about your engagement. Now that you've received the promise ring, why don't you trust Oscar and wait? Lyra must have been very important to the princess, but it would not be good to write to the princess every time like this. Moreover, the crown prince's recent movements made the princess look uncomfortable. Some of the aristocratic party had been told that their business had gone bankrupt. Alicia had heard that they were even considering leaving the capital, saying that there was no possibility of their business being revived. But they would perish like that because the princess was the person to reach out to those who had already gone bankrupt. While the bankrupt aristocrats were not the main figures of the aristocratic party, an increase in the number of their downfall would surely create anxiety within the aristocratic party. No, there was already a bit of talk. If they would go bad so slowly like that, they would explode someday. Of course, the rumors Alicia had heard through her old connections and what she had seen over Lyra's shoulder were all, but she thought Lyra shouldn't bother the princess anyway with such a little thing. What was more, it was a matter of relationship between man and woman. I believe Mr. Oscar, of course, but I have to get rid of the bad pest that sticks around him. Miss, I'll do something about the pest. So you only think about being a good duchess? Lyra blinked her eyes at Alicia's soothing tone and asked. How would you do that? Would I add seasoning to her tea? Seasoning? Lyra's eyes glistened upon hearing the word seasoning, even though she knew it was not just a condiment to make a drink taste good. But who is going to put it in? Unless someone was hired from the outside, it was impossible to do so. One person had to sacrifice herself to finish it from the inside. They would not be able to easily get a person to do it because of last year's wagon incident. I'll get the person, miss. So, miss, just relax and savor your future of being a duchess. They were just words to calm Lyra down anyway. Lyra would forgive her even if she wouldn't finish it properly. Alicia was no different from her mother, who had taken care of her since she had been very young. And if Celine would really interfere with Lyra, Alicia would step in herself. It would be meaningful if she sacrificed herself to promote Lyra's well-being. However, she just didn't feel the need to do so yet. More than that, there was a faction that was created lately. Why don't you try to get acquainted with them? Alicia recommended having Lyra contact young aristocrats, recalling the recent creation of a new faction around them. Until now, the new faction had not been an important force, but suddenly they had begun to make a name for themselves at a certain point. They were still young and inexperienced, but even though the reason had not been known to the public, they had made a huge success in every business they had done, and everyone had had a great interest in most of their projects. They did not have a great man to lead them, but somehow they had clung together as if they had been centered on someone. They were even close enough to hold meetings among themselves often. Lyra nodded, saying it was a good idea because she had also known them. Good idea, Alicia. I'm sure the princess would like it, too. Sure. Since our cash cow is in danger, we should attract a new force and build a friendship. They are in the middle ground now, but don't you think they want to belong to a party? I think so, too. Moreover, our side has you and the princess, and they may be anxious to come in. Why didn't I think of that? I'm sure the princess will like that. I'll have a meal with their wives. Yes. I think if you ask them to have lunch together, they'll welcome you with open arms. Chapter 115. Then would you contact them? Don't worry, miss. At last Alicia swept her chest down on Lyra's brightened face. Bringing young aristocrats to the aristocratic party would earn the trust of the princess more than it was now, and the value of Lyra would rise. No matter how successful the business was, a lower aristocrat would always be a lower aristocrat. For the future, they would need a network of people to support themselves. And for that personal connection, Lyra was very appropriate. Not long after the year had changed, the mansion had been in a state of uproar. Some wives Celine had never seen had visited the mansion of Count Vermont. It had been because of the tea party hosted by Lyra. It was hard for Celine to understand because Lyra had always invited high-ranking nobles who would be profitable to her. It was the same for Annie, too, and she went downstairs, secretly glanced at the meeting, and returned to Celine's room with a puzzled face. I don't understand. How can Ms. Lyra hang out with the baronesses? There is even a commoner. She looked quite disappointed in her anger. Although she had been so fascinated by the gold and silver treasures that she had sided with Celine, she seemed shocked by the sudden change in Lyra, whom she had long admired. The brooch on Annie's chest, sitting on the other side, sparkled in the light. It was a rose brooch from Oscar. The brooch, which had played Lyra dozens enough, ended up in Annie's hands. The card had to be thrown away with certainty. Celine wasn't going to hold Oscar anymore. Celine, who had risked her future on him when she had first returned, was no longer applicable. Now she had achieved quite a lot, and she would have better cards in the future. Arranging them one by one had convinced her that Oscar alone meant nothing. The brooch now had no value left, but as a present, it will have, as Celine had given it to Annie. If she would meet him, she would not feel anything. After glancing at it, Celine asked, what were they talking about? It sounded like a business story. I don't know well. It was a kind of business story, and they were talking about their husband's business? Really? Celine was also curious at the meetings, which had been held nearly every day. What could have changed her like this, even though it was Lyra, who had never been associated with a lower aristocrat, let alone a commoner? Unable to resist the curiosity, Celine went downstairs pretending to take a walk. Because of the winter, they had a meeting in the garden on the second floor. The door to the garden was open, so Celine went into it as if she were taking a walk. Inside, there were 15 young women and Lyra drinking tea and talking about something. She walked slowly through the garden and heard it at first, but the main story was about business. In between, there was a laugh of a girl. Oh, miss. While listening carefully, one of the attendants noticed Celine's visit. It was also because Celine approached their table. Dozens of eyes were intrigued by the newly featured figure, and to clear up their curiosity, Lyra called Celine's name. Celine. Lyra. Lyra seemed to have forgotten all about the brooch. She was smiling in harmony with the assembled women. Celine couldn't tell if it was pretentious or not, but the fact that Lyra was smiling in itself made Celine feel bad. What in the world has made her so happy? Celine tried to take a look at one by one, but they had not been in her memory, and they were only small fries. This is my elder sister. Lyra introduced Celine to the women who gathered. It was a very simple introduction with no modifiers, but everyone greeted with a different look as if they had recognized Celine. It was a familiar situation. Celine received a gaze of various emotions in one body and stood up. You look happy. Can I come with you? The uninvited lady was going to join. Besides, it was she who had bad rumors. If they were ordinary ladies, they would scoff at her so as to shake their eyelashes, fanning themselves to the point of shaking. But all the women gathered here were the wives of emerging businessmen. Most of them were low-class nobles, and there were even commoners. For them, the appearance of Celine was more interesting than unpleasant. Don't you think she can do that? The more people get to gather, the more interesting the story will be, said a woman sitting in the middle of the table. Seeing her eyes shine, her feelings for Celine seemed to be a curiosity that was close to favor. You must be wondering who the wicked woman of the rumor is. Moreover, she might be curious because it was time for the rumors about the wicked woman were divided into several parts. Fortunately, other wives nodded, saying that it would be good since she was quite influential in this group. At this point, the opinion of Lyra, who was the most identifiable and had the highest standing, was not reflected at all. It was different from the other ladies who had always looked into Lyra's feelings and only agreed. They said that there is a commoner, and that's why. Celine, blinking slowly unexpectedly, staring at the woman, smiled charmingly. It seemed like a very fun meeting. Celine's seat was just opposite Lyra, close to the center of the table. It was a very good place to see Lyra's face. Celine was able to find a feature in the women who presented themselves in order as soon as she was seated. Aren't they the wives of the family I have invested in? They were the wives of the successful entrepreneurs who she had invested in. All the entrepreneurs had been introduced to her and she had invested in, so the solidarity between them was quite strong. According to Andrew, who was in contact with them, the people who had received the investment from Celine also had regular meetings. Of course, it was not a voluntary meeting, but it had been started when Celine had suggested it would be better to do so. It was a relationship that started with the hope that the young entrepreneurs who had been invested by an anonymous investor A would like to have a strong relationship. But those wives are all gathered together. It was as if Celine knew what Lyra was up to. They were the emerging forces based on capital, so Lyra intended to attract them to her group. There would now be bankrupt aristocrats in the aristocratic party, and they would have a great interest in those who accumulated wealth. Although most of them were inferior nobles and commoners, they would not fit their level, but they would need funds. But will it be? It's me, the anonymous investor A, who they are loyal to. At one point it was Celine who had made them the rising star of the empire. They expressed their loyalty by sending letters to Celine, whom they had never seen before. If they could meet, they would kneel down and kiss her feet. But are they going to enter the aristocratic party that they would be used as consumables and discarded? Apart from status, they are businessmen. They are smart, so they'll never do it. After each introduction, the interrupted conversation began again, so Celine drank tea and listened to their conversation. But every time we meet, I feel like we're talking about the investor, because the grace we receive is great. He or she is the only one in the world who invests in a business plan with no conditions attached. That's right. If the investor didn't invest, our business would be ruined. There was someone who wanted to buy technology. My husband's been thinking for a long time. So am I. I'm sure I'd have to sell my mansion if I hadn't been invested. Thank God. Oh, so did I. I was going to sell all the jewelry I had and add to my husband's business. They were constantly praising the investor. Most of them said that they received timely investments to prevent devastation. Celine felt strange about the wives she saw for the first time today. She had heard a lot of abuse in public, rather than compliment. It was difficult to control her facial expression because she felt itchy and daunting somewhere in her stomach. So she lowered her raised mouth by pretending to wipe her mouth with a handkerchief. Maybe it was because she encountered the feelings that she always had in writing. Lyra, who had been smiling and listening to the conversation all the time, asked, "I'd love to see that investor once, too. By the way, what happened to those jewels now? Did you get it back?" Chapter 116. No, I didn't get them back. I didn't have to get those cheap gems back, to be. The Baroness replied in a confident voice. It meant that she didn't have to pay attention to a few pennies of old jewelry, as she recovered her wealth in just a few months. That's very fortunate. And now is not the time to pay attention to those little things. I'm going to do my best to help him until his business stabilizes. A spark seemed to come from her eyes to help her husband's business. It was a passion not found in the nobles who were already born with everything. Lyra asked her with a curled head, "Is that so? But wouldn't your husband be okay with it? That's what he's been doing. I think it would be better to hire an expert." As for Lyra, it seemed incomprehensible that she was actively helping her husband's business. She asked, "Don't you know it's enough if you are giving him a few words of advice to keep the mood in order? What is the need for you to do your best? No, we've been working together so far. The expert may still be a bit far off." The answer was as firm as the glare of her eyes. There was as much difference between wealth and power as there was heaven and earth, but there was no difficulty in expressing her opinion. "It's interesting that you work together. What kind of work are you helping? The Baron's wife made an impassioned speech about her role as if she had been waiting for Celine's question. He's too busy with outside work to manage the internal affairs in detail. So I'm usually in charge of internal management. I'm handling the management and accounting of imported materials. It's not difficult yet. It's possible by myself. She seemed proud of what she was doing. It must have been a great deal if she was really dealing with those things alone. Celine replied with pure admiration, who realized they had not succeeded simply by her investing. You're in charge of a lot of work. Since you're dealing with an uneasy task for others, your husband may be able to put himself at ease. When Celine answered that question, recalling a book that had emphasized that people should be careful when assigning people to areas where the money would flow, the Baroness slipped her cheeks. Thank you. Of course, as Lady Lyra said, if the business is more prosperous, then we'll have to hire. Yes, it'd better. Even if you can't help it now, you'll have to pay attention to your family. It would be efficient to leave the job to an expert then. When her name was mentioned in Mrs. Baron's mouth, Lyra smiled with great joy. She was a woman who thought that aristocratic women should work hard to protect her family, so she didn't back down. No. That's not what I think, Lyra. I think it's a good idea for her to play a role in monitoring them even if they hire people later. She doesn't have to abandon her ability, does she? But the same was true of Celine, who remained steadfast in the argument. Your argument makes sense, but who takes care of the family then? Mrs. Baroness should take care of it so that the Baron can concentrate on his work outside in peace. The family business is of course important. So I'm not saying she should stay in business. I'm just asking her to take the watch. She has enough power to do it. Oh, that's what you're talking about, isn't it? But from now on, the Baroness will have to spend a lot of time caring for her family and building her position. She'll have to meet a lot of people like today. So she doesn't have time to help with the business, does she? Do you need to be so sure? She's already doing well enough, so I'm sure she will. Lyra and Celine kept their ground. The biggest reason was that they could never accept each other's opinions. Of course, the tone was soft and the expression was gentle, so it was seen as just exchanging opinions for those who were not familiar with the relationship. Oh, thank you both. So far, I'd like to help out with my husband's business. It's rewarding. Of course, my job will be gone in time, so I'll have to work hard to revive the family. In the end, the wise Baroness ended up accepting both Celine and Lyra. But Lyra added the unnecessary words as she didn't like the conclusion. Good idea, ma'am. You have a lot of work to do to lead the family. It's also important. But I'll let you know slowly from now on, so don't worry. Why don't you join me at my meeting next week? Lyra folded her eyes and said affectionately. She looked very reliable, perhaps because she was a young lady who would later become a duchess. She reached out her hand and if she held her, she would have a smooth future. Count Virmont's support would be much greater than that of Investor A. In addition, if she built a friendship with Lyra, no one would despise the Baroness. But the Baroness shook her head quietly. Thank you for your saying, but that's a little difficult because it's just beginning to water in. He still needs me. I barely spared time today. Please call me back next time and I'll try to attend. Yeah? Then I can't help it. How about the others? Holding Lyra's hand here must have been a choice for their well-being. They might have got something more than their husband's success. However, no one offered to do so, only to be aware of it. It was partly because everyone was so busy that they had to share tea parties over a few days, not long after the business began to rise. It's a little early, isn't it? It's enough to be treated like this by Lady Lyra. It's also a burden for a commoner like me to attend. Why don't we figure out who we are, said a young lady with a smile. She was from the common people, so she didn't hesitate to speak. Perhaps they had already established a strong rapport among themselves. They didn't feel any difficulty to talk to Lyra freely, but they were just having a conversation with a big smile. They had been invited by the high nobility, so they only participated out of curiosity, and did not seem to have any intention of continuing ties or flattery. Lyra's mouth was shaking so fine that no one could notice it. "Oh, my God, you've become a loner at a gathering that you've created to attract new powers." At the sight of Lyra, Celine smiled softly as she took the cup of tea to her mouth. "That's why you should have recognized people well and picked one." Although some wives looked interested and talked to Lyra, the majority of the wives were only enthusiastic about business stories. And Lyra, who only knew about them on the surface, was naturally left out. "How foolish of you not to have prepared information about those you are trying to attract." Celine, who thought of it, put down the teacup and said, "So, I hear Baron Clean recently imported a new spice?" Unlike Lyra, Celine was able to melt naturally because she knew all the business of their husbands. Perhaps she didn't know Celine would know that, but the Baroness opened her eyes wide and said yes. "Did you get the word out of the mouth?" "It's not on the market yet, but I was personally interested, so I found out while I was looking. I've heard that it's cheap and rich in the taste of. I'm sure you'll succeed." "I'm just glad you could see it like that. It's still a question of whether it will sell well." "You don't have to ask questions. No other country is more enthusiastic about spices than the Empire. Moreover, there is no reason to fail, as you can provide spices that were almost exclusive to the nobility." "You say the same thing as the investor." "Investor A also wrote us a letter to cheer on. I'm sure it'll be everyone's favorite spice." The future was set, so Celine gave advice to other wives, saying the business would be successful. The advice was appropriate because she was well informed, and there was considerable overlap with what the investor had said, so the wives all listened to her. Before they knew it, the tide of the meeting was leaning from Lyra to Celine. It was not Lyra who would sit still and watch the main body of the meeting flow to Celine. Why are all the invitees so bewildered by the vulgar, wicked woman's words? Chapter 117. It's a groundbreaking item. But that's all Lyra could say. To her who did not know the details, the conversation that the wives and Celine were talking about sounded like the language of the other world. But even so, she always had a strong ally, Alicia. At Lyra's eye signal, Alicia brought out something she had prepared. It was a crystal artifact that everyone would like, regardless of the aristocracy and the common people. At Alicia's instructions, Lyra's maids handed them out to the ladies. This broke the friendly atmosphere of Celine and the wives, and the initiative went back to Lyra. "Oh, my God, what is this?" The ladies' eyes were wide open on the rose-shaped crystal brooch. At a glance, it was not an ordinary thing. What was more, it was the shape of a rose. Without knowing the reason, they asked carefully what it was for. "Oh, it's nothing special but a small gift. I should have given you that earlier, but it's a little late. You're giving us this brooch? You can think of it as a celebration of your visit." The gifts were too much for the occasion of the visit. Crystal. Though small in size, its presence was no match for any jewelry. The wives glanced at Lyra with trembling faces. Because they vaguely felt that it was not just a gift to celebrate their visit. And Celine, reading their faces, swallowed a laugh. What a trick to give a sense of unity with a brooch. Since this had not happened in the past, she thought it might be her influence. What's more, it's the shape of a rose. Why does the Count family's lady play with the shape of a rose already? No matter how much he promised, she still had 3 years to get married to Oscar. She was not even the owner of the Frederick family yet. Do you really think that's going to work? They were already the ones who had said they would not hold hands. Rather than showing off the connections and becoming a social flower, they said they would help their husband's business by hand. It was impossible for them to fall for a crystal brooch. That was all Lyra could think about, and everyone in the world seemed to think so. A frog in a well would be wiser than this. Thank you for your heart, but I think it's too much for me. How dare I intrude among the nobles as a commoner? Then, the woman in the corner said, putting the crystal down on the table. Then another woman sitting next to her put down her crystal on the table. I'm sorry, but so am I. I think it would be a great insult to the noble Lady Lyra. When the wives put down the brooches one after another, Lyra's face turned pale. Some of them secretly took care of the crystal, but most of them indicated that they could not receive it. That's why you should have let them go when they first refused, Lyra. Too much regret was ugly. It was such a funny thing. But soon after, Lyra, who would become a duchess, did not even have the heart of a commoner woman. Yes, this may be all Lyra's original ability. A child who can't do anything without the background of Vermont family. All she could do was put on a mask and pretend to be high-handed. Actually, Celine was so angry that Lyra was nothing but this. How foolish I was in the past, I would have been killed by a woman of this caliber. Of course, from now on, all the humiliation she had suffered would come to Lyra. Celine, the winner of the day, folded up her fan and handed it to Annie. A triumphant look seemed to express the joy she had gained. Lyra, I think you'd better end the meeting now. It's a long way off. Isn't it rude to hold wives who are just beginning to step up their business for so long? As if they had waited for Celine's words, the wives pretended to check the time for nothing, and looked embarrassed. There would be no reason to drink tea with them anymore, given that neither the offer to lead nor the offer to join the same group was rejected. That'd be a good idea. As soon as Lyra's words fell, the wives hurried ready to return. And as if waiting for the word to come out, the wives were busy, too. But Lyra, insulted in front of countless women, did not send them with a smile as bright as she had just smiled. Lyra, with a cold look on her face, added advice to the wives who were about to return. The meeting will end today. It's been fun. The next time we see each other, we may not be able to sit face to face and talk about. It was more like a warning to the humble who despised her. It was a threat that she would not let go. Lyra was telling them what she really wanted. Wasn't she the one who always had a smile on her face? Celine had no idea what Lyra had been like until she had been decapitated. It was because she'd been hiding completely. But now she expressed her heart to this extent. Maybe, unlike the past, when she always did what she wanted to do, things that didn't work out of her control exploded. Maybe it wasn't enough to hide the rotten inside out. Now that you've taken off the mask of a saint, I'll welcome it. At Lyra's warning, the wives showed signs of uneasiness. It was because they didn't know Lyra, who was rumored to be benevolent, would take such an attitude. They might be regretting being too open-minded, as she treated them with a gentle smile. It was Celine who would resolve such wives' anxieties. Even if she were hiding her identity, they were her people she had collected. As if to steal the missing soft expression from Lyra's face, Celine said goodbye to the ladies with a benevolent, tender smile. Can I host the next tea party, then? We can't end our precious relationship so easily. Celine spoke of the nuances that she would bear them threatened by Lyra. On the surface, it was Celine that was no match for Lyra in all respects, but still was the eldest daughter of the Count family, so the wives seemed quite relieved. Well, I'll have to go back now. Thank you for inviting me. I hope the future of Lady Lyra will be full of happiness. Lyra, who answered with a cold smile to the wives who said goodbye, was the first to disappear from the garden. It was a cold-hearted figure with no regrets. Alicia, who followed her, vanished with a fierce look on her face, so that Celine wouldn't notice. Then, may you go home safely. So Celine rose from her seat, because she had accomplished what she had hoped. She thought she should be careful not to have any more high-ranking aristocrats coveting them. Lady Celine. As she was about to leave, Mrs. Clean called her name. When she looked at her eyes, she spoke with a very excited face. If you're free, why don't you join our next meeting? It's not exactly our meeting, it's a meeting of the people invested by the investor, but I hope you will come to the meeting and give them some advice. Seeing the wives sitting around her nodding their heads with bright faces, it seemed that they seemed to have finished their discussion in that short time. Celine answered her with a very satisfied smile. Oh, I don't know if I can attend. What do you mean? You're more knowledgeable than anyone else here. You also have the same viewpoint as the investor, so I'm sure they'll all benefit from your advice. That's right. The investor told us to accept a new person at any time. How surprised would they be to know that the investor was her? With such a funny imagination, Celine nodded. In fact, she had wanted to attend, but she had delayed it because she didn't think it was time to reveal her identity. It didn't seem bad to come in naturally and see how they were doing. Thank you for speaking about it. Then I will do it. Celine said goodbye politely to the lightly clapping wives, delighted with Celine's positive response, and went out of the garden. Baron Bourbon and Andrew, who had been struggling to hide her identity, might faint with foam, but her imaginative mouth painted a good line. Mr. Asher, the new power group that I talked about last time, centered on the Baron Bourbon. Chapter 118. A very tired-looking face, Asher nodded, putting down the document. He was now in a small town far from the capital. This was due to the aristocratic party's rise to power. When Asher's permission fell, Lane hurried on. In fact, one of my relatives got the offer. Lane, scratching his cheek, had a pretty embarrassing face. Asher asked again, your relative? Yes, he's been stuck in a room all the time, and he's been having a strange delusion. I don't know how he got the offer. I don't think the investor A is not going to let anyone in, so I'm sure there's something very capable about your relative. It was still a small force compared to the aristocratic party, but now that it was too big to ignore. Well, I just hope he doesn't come back with tears. Lane, embarrassed by the praise of Asher, answered, clearing his throat. Asher's eyes were fierce by the idle talk except for the main subject. So, that's not the point, right? Yes. He's been asked to join the meeting once and see what's going on. So I thought about how Mr. Asher would participate instead of my relative. Oh, that's what you are saying. It was a force that he had been paying attention to. It was quite a large scale for a baron. The amount was too large to support the business of countless young businessmen. He was sure there must be a considerable number of powerful people behind the force, and he had been prying back the whole time. If it was in the middle of the party, he was going to have to pull it over to his side. Anyway, the work was almost finished. It wasn't long before he got back to the capital, so it was a great opportunity to approach. All right, I'll do that. Oh, and I think the Duke has put too much pressure on us and we have to release the luxury goods. It is said that His Majesty couldn't stand it anymore, and he was in a fit of rage. He ordered to bring Mr. Asher in. The backlash was faster than he thought. It might be because of the fast rising price in the market. He didn't calculate that the market was going to jump this far, but he assumed it was probably because someone had been playing around with sugar in the beginning. How many of them are bankrupt? Who has left the capital? About 13 are bankrupt. 5 went out of the capital city. The trade route is cut off anyway, and the other 8 will not be able to revive, so they'll have to get out of the capital soon. All right. Then try to release it. There's still a big fish left anyway, so it's okay to let go of the small fries. I see. Viscount Vig is not sound of mind. He runs like an idiot, even if there's the princess behind him. I think we can squeeze them in a row and get rid of at least 10 more. The princess may not know. If she had known, she wouldn't have let him go. It was due to the suggestion of Celine. He had never thought of that before she had told him to sell the casino. Of course, he had been subjected to all kinds of insults for being incompetent, but as a result, he had been able to catch a big fish. Viscount Vig seemed to have tried to take advantage of the Cr. Julia faced by the aristocratic party, but he was also outraged, but he didn't know that the person who had introduced him to the casino was the enemy. It was the best choice that scattered their power at once. Then I think Lady Celine really had a great vision. You endured a brief insult and caught a big fish. Lane also began to praise Celine with her name in his mouth as if he felt sympathetic, and Asher nodded his head and included the remaining documents in his eyes. His mouth was slightly raised because Celine's name was mentioned, and he came up with her face. At the sight of Asher, who seemed to be in a good mood for the first time in a long time, Lane went overboard and talked nonsense. He didn't know why, but he had always expressed his joy when it came to Celine. So why don't you come to see Celine, so that you can cool off for a while? What? Thanks to Lady Celine, things have worked out well, and only the finishing touch remained. I think it's okay if you go and see her for a while anyway. It won't take long. Generally, it was a long way to the capital, which took more than 10 days by carriage, but it was only for ordinary people, not for Asher. Asher, who rolled his eyes, seemed to think for a moment, and soon shook his head. No, even the time to go and come is an instant, but I can't stand the aftermath because it's a long way to go. Then, Lane reminded of Asher, who had suffered from uncomfortable behavior, after using the power, and he hurriedly bowed down and apologized, saying, I didn't want to talk about it. Asher had not traveled long distances lately, so Lane forgot because he hadn't seen him suffer. It's not long before I go back, so I can go and see. In conclusion, however, he said he was going to see Celine, though it would be a little late. Then, Lane smiled bitterly. Asher had been educated like the Crown Prince since he was very young, and he had never been a child of his own age, but now he had seen it thanks to Celine. Then I'll do my best to finish the job quickly. I don't know if I should stay up all night. Don't tell me you've had a good night's sleep so far. Never, never. I've had a hard time living an uncomfortable life. Lane barely managed to put up with the addition that the fatigue had destroyed his handsome face. If he said another word here, he might have to take on other people's business. He could not bring down the tower built with Celine's story. I'll take care of it as soon as I can. Later, Lane quickly released the luxury goods to the market, as reported to Asher. Of course, the man who had been supplying luxury goods had to step back carefully to avoid revealing his identity, and he sent him to spend his vacation abroad to rest for the time being. When the new luxury goods were finally approved by the customs office, there was widespread derision that the Crown Prince gave in to the aristocratic party. The aristocratic party insulted him with excitement, and the moderates and some nobles in the Crown Prince's party also seemed to be agonizing over whether the war was really going downhill. But it was also for a while. This was because they could not keep up with the plummeting prices of luxury goods. It was due to the excessive purchase of luxury goods. Furthermore, it wasn't a monopoly anymore because they were released so much in the market. The aristocratic party no longer had the means to control the market to their heart's content, as in the past. Asher handed over the trade route he had taken from the aristocratic party to Marquis Vincent, who had been guarding the moderate party for generations. When the Marquis was first asked to take care of the luxury goods, he refused coldly, saying, "Don't let this bother me because I'm still busy in many ways." But he soon accepted it, even though he grumbled whether the aristocratic party's dominance was displeased. "Mr. Marquis, Pinocchio sent you a letter." Marquis Vincent stared at his butler, who had brought the letter, for a moment, and he sighed. Although he did not like the aristocratic party's dominance, he thought he had no reason to take the trade route even though he was still busy. And the interference was intense. "Give me that." The letter he sent was quite concise. Sell luxury goods at less than half the original price. And it was cocky. So he managed to put up with this letter, muttering that it would not be Pinocchio but the Crown Prince. He could see his intentions. Even if he would sell them at less than half the price, the number of buyers other than aristocrats would not increase because the original price was high. The price of luxury goods, however low, was extremely high for the common people. So, no matter how playful he was at the times, there would be no harm to their peace. The Crown Prince is not going to leave the aristocratic party alone. Chapter 119. It was not enough to take away luxury goods that were monopolized by the aristocratic party, call procedures, and to not give them new permits. He made some nobles bankrupt and now was about to crash into the market. Perhaps they had been rushing to open a new account, and if the market would fall, they wouldn't be able to make a profit. It was likely that the deal might have been done at a price many times higher than the trade route the Crown Prince intercepted. And if I'm going to take the market down here? The aristocrats, who had suffered losses by purchasing luxury goods at exorbitant prices, would try to buy cheap ones at a glance. They would pretend not to be on the outside but buy something cheap. If the aristocratic party cut their prices accordingly, they would suffer losses as much as they sold. They won't sell it at a fair price, and if they lower the price and sell it, they'll lose money, so them losing is only a matter of time whichever option they choose. The Marquis of Vincent always thought that the Crown Prince had been being pushed by the aristocratic party, but he was doing pretty well. He was just before the adult ceremony and was doing an unstoppable attack. It was only the nobles that were harmed. When the Marquis got his thoughts straightened out, he was quite pleased with what the Crown Prince was doing. Vincent smiled, raising the corners of his mouth. I'll have to write a letter. Bring me a pen and paper. There was no hesitation in writing back. The smooth-written letter was a total of 2 letters, one for Pinocchio Lane, and the other for his man, who managed the luxury goods. The Marquis, under the direction of the Crown Prince, lowered the price of luxury goods, which led to the bankruptcy of several nobles of the aristocratic party again. Oh my gosh. Miss, did you hear the news? Annie called Celine, acting imprudently. Celine was just reading a newspaper, so she could quickly see what she wanted to say. Are you talking about the casino case? That's right. How can corruption occur at the casino again? Is it cursed? The curse on the casino owner. One of Celine's mouths was raised to a childlike concept that was not appropriate for her age. Annie blushed and hurriedly made an excuse. Oh, no, well. I mean. Is there really such a curse? It may be. It might be a curse. Certainly, it was the curse of the Crown Prince. 2 casino owners were severely punished by the Crown Prince. The former would have made a mistake on his own, but for the latter, she was not sure about. However, it was suspected that perhaps the latter had been played a fish in the hands of the Crown Prince. The aristocratic party who bought the casino that was originally owned by the Crown Prince is stupid. You're right. It wasn't a penny or 2, but I think it was taken over too rashly. They were caught in a string of wires, but it was stupid. I doubt if they're really a nobleman. Even the working class don't trade in such a short time when they take over stores. But the time had been too short for Viscount Vig. It was doubtful that he had even looked at the documents related to the casino. Well, it's a good thing anyway. What? What's a good thing? That's why the Count is getting pretty messed up, too. The more the aristocratic party collapsed, the better. That way, wouldn't it be possible to completely destroy the stupid Lyra? It was okay to say that the Count Vermont family would go bankrupt. No, if it went bankrupt, the princess wouldn't take care of Lyra anymore. After all, the Count Vermont family had not helped her. And there was no need for such a vain title anymore. Aren't countless young businessmen pledging allegiance to themselves now? In addition, she heard that there were countless of people who wanted to participate in the meeting led by Investor A, so it was better to watch the Count Vermont family squeeze out a teary nose as it was ruined. It also seemed to be pleasant. Lyra, who wears old clothes and falls on the streets crying. Celine answered with a smile. Yes, I made a mistake. I'm afraid my father will feel uncomfortable. Annie and Jessica tilted their heads at the tone, which did not have a drop of sincerity. Either it had or not, Celine kept the tea in her mouth with a smile on it. The tea is really bad. How can you make something like this? Huh? Barry. Barry shuddered like an aspen tree when some blame was on her again today. Celine didn't hit her otherwise, but Celine didn't know how scared Barry was. Isn't that cute? I'm telling you're saying. That's how I still don't understand how she got a job in the Count Vermont family. As Annie helped, Barry's face turned colorful. She seemed to bear her anger. Annie hit Barry's arm with a fan and warned her. You're not mad, are you? It's weird that you're angry in the first place. Oh, no. The answer was like that, but it was a face that her pride was hurt very much. It was time to get used to it, but why did she still build her self-esteem? Celine dropped the cup of tea on the floor, as she didn't want to see it. Clank. A high-end crystal teacup, which must have been made by a craftsman, hit the floor and broke into pieces. Annie and Jessica also looked at Barry's wreckage with eyes wide open, perhaps surprised. Clean that up and bring me a new tea. I'm thirsty, so do it within 5 minutes. It was a ridiculous request, but Barry could not excuse it. That was the difference in status, whatever Celine's origin was. Barry closed her eyes and opened it to get rid of the debris, and she hurried out of the room, ignoring the scars on her hands. It's almost dinner time. Miss, are you going to have another tea again? No way. Shouldn't I have dinner now? I can waste the tea. I'd better get Barry to drink it all. That was quite the harassment, not as much dust, compared to what Celine had been harassed in the past. Isn't she at least alive? If she can't stand this much, why did she accuse me so cruelly? At the turn of 10 minutes after 5 minutes, Barry appeared and looked pale as if she had imagined the imminent severe punishment. Miss. I brought the new tea. The flapping hands looked very pathetic. Really? What a poor girl. 5 minutes had already passed, and I think I'll have to go to dinner, but I'm sure you'll have it all. Celine, who rose from her seat, walked out of her room with a graceful gait, straightening her back. Annie and Jessica also followed her, so Barry was left alone in Celine's room. The shallow, vulgar slut. Now she was not afraid but full of tears and anger, but she had the same ferocity as she had had in the past when she had declared Celine's sins in detail. Today, the atmosphere of the dinner was heavy, and Celine was eating with a big smile inside her. The atmosphere of the funeral parlor would be brighter than this. The Count said with a dark face. I don't know how many already. I can't believe they went bankrupt so easily. Honey. The Countess, who had no other knowledge in the aristocratic society, was extremely reticent, with a look of regret. It was a wise choice. If she didn't go against the Count by saying something she shouldn't, she would survive for a long time. I heard it was the Marquis of Vincent, who drove down the price of luxury goods. Wasn't he, a moderate? Lyra's face was not bright either. He was. I thought so, but I don't know why he turned around all of a sudden. He doesn't budge an inch when I tell him to raise the price. He said he'd only sell what he got with a cheap price. I didn't think he was the one to do that. What a mess the market is right now. So do I. I've always thought he was cold but straight, but how could he do this? Furthermore, I can't believe what the Viscount of Vig did. When the name of the Viscount of Vig came out, the Count's complexion was thrown away like a corpse. If luxury goods were a simple matter of funding, the Viscount of Vig was a big problem that shook the inside of the aristocratic party. Chapter 120. I don't want to talk about it now. That's why clean aristocrats are running wild. Besides, the account book that recorded the corruption happened fell into the hands of the Crown Prince. A book with detailed names in it. Celine pricked up her ears at the mention of the account book and focused on the story. The Count's wife's eyes sparkled as well as if she was interested. Is there anything more interesting than saying that someone is going to fall? Oh, my God, you have to expel him right now. How could he make such corruption? I'm also ashamed of it. The Count sighed because of Miel's answer that he must be resolutely exiled from the aristocratic party. It seemed to be difficult to even touch him. For instance, it might be the princess. The aristocratic party wouldn't be so easily ruined, but this incident would have shaken their foundation. This was because they had simply gathered against the imperial power, not to commit corruption. There would be also some clean and upright people. The Count of Vermont was not a wicked man either. Celine was sure that surely those who had felt shameful through this incident would be numerous. Such people were likely to leave the aristocratic party. So, if they were a little superior to the Crown Prince before, they might be a little behind the Crown Prince now. Please, I hope the Crown Prince would mess up the aristocratic party. Then revenge would happen very quickly and easily. In the past, she could not even remember his name because she had no other contacts with him. He would, too, because in the past he had been a man whose name had been buried in his place. Furthermore, it didn't matter if he was a royal family member, he had had no presence than the princess. Celine had thought he was just an ugly and foolish royal family member, who was dragged by the aristocratic party. Besides, there had been no chance to see him other than some high-ranking aristocrats, and even if she could see a small figure from a very distant foot. So she hadn't put much value on him. It must have been, but it was like a sailboat with a following breeze. What on earth had changed with him? There was no hesitation, as if he had become a completely different person. I think what I've been doing has been a butterfly effect, but he was so high and so far that she couldn't find a point of contact. If she thought of one possibility, it would be like a meeting with Asher. It was true that he was an extraordinary figure, and her news might have been passed on through him to the Crown Prince. So Celine began to speculate again on the identity of Asher. Is he the Emperor's hidden child? As long as he was not insane, the Crown Prince, under pressure from the aristocratic party, could not wander around the capital alone. It was quite plausible that he was the Emperor's hidden child. Because it was an open fact that there were not only one or two hidden children who were not disclosed at the royal house. She heard that there were many who had been ousted due to minor power struggles. Rumors had also circulated that they were hiding their identity and living as a commoner outside. So she was wondering if he was one of them, but suddenly the Count called her name. It was a very friendly voice. Celine. Yeah. After being praised several times for the warehouse, Celine, surprised by the Count, answered with her eyes wide open. The Count's face on the opposite side was very dark. The Count hesitated a little to Celine, wondering why he suddenly called her name, and soon came up with the main topic. I wonder what you think. Is there any way we can get out of this case? Way to escape? Yes. You're a smart kid, so I thought maybe you'd have thought about something. Oh, that's what you meant. From the fur business to the warehouse, she had brought him success twice, and he seemed to be trying to ask for help again. Now? You left the misunderstanding of Lane alone as if the accomplishment of the fur business belonged to Miel? If the Count had corrected Lane's misconceptions at the time, she would not have turned away from him so much. No, maybe she might have tried to look good for the Count to take away Miel's place. But it was all over. She realized that he was not a man who would bear her that was not a real daughter, and that no matter how hard she tried, he would not change. Everything existed for his own daughter, Miel, and numerous glories were also handed over to her. She went through the past like that a while ago, and now she couldn't help the Count. If she had tried to help in the first place, she would have done it before it happened. At the Count's question, Celine looked a little stupid and shook her head as if she didn't know. Well, it's too difficult for me. I didn't understand any of what you were saying. The same is true of what Miel said. You have a little thought, though. No, unfortunately, I don't have any thoughts. I see. I think I'm expecting too much from you. You don't even know it yet. At Celine's simple answer, the Count showed disappointment in his face. Miel glanced at her and had a face that said, yes, you are. What kind of father is he? Does he look for me only when he needs me? Isn't that too much, even if I'm not your biological daughter? If I didn't have this angular personality, I might have locked myself in my room and squeezed out my tears. All the affection that didn't exist was gone, leaving nothing but disgust. The food that was passing through her mouth was so terrible that it was as if she was eating the gutter. I'm sorry, but I don't feel well, so I think I'll have to get up. She felt as if she would vomit if she stayed there. The Count drew a word of permission on Celine's increasingly pale face, and she went straight out of the dining room and disappeared into her room. I think I should call a doctor. The Countess glanced anxiously at the place where Celine had disappeared to. Then Miel, who had her eyes on the Count, opened her mouth. Wouldn't they call a doctor if she is not good, since there are maids beside her? Rather than that, Darian will be back in a while, and if we don't get rid of this mess, he'll be taking on a lot. I'm sure he must be. Oscar must have a lot of work to do, too. Besides, you too. It was the Countess alone who was worried about Celine because she felt sick. She glanced at the entrance to the dining room several more times, and soon burst into an uninvited grin between them, who was absorbed in the story she didn't know. A few days later, Celine was busy preparing to join the meeting Investor had gathered. She decorated herself not too much as she did with her meeting with Asher. Miss, why don't you wear a necklace? It's too simple. Annie encouraged Celine to wear a colorful necklace. Jessica also did not like the simple dress, and she brought some earrings and bracelets. You don't have to wear them since it's a place where I will only hear stories. But Annie looked at her fancy dress and was about to cry. Perhaps she was burdened with her appearance more colorful than her master. However, Annie had to decorate herself because she was about to meet Baron Burboom. Celine smiled and handed over her hair. I don't have to wear fancy clothes since I have a visible appearance. It seemed as if she was uplifting herself, but it had a real meaning that Annie could dress up in it. Annie, accustomed to Celine's tone of such an expression, soon found her face and regained her bright face. Well, go on, miss. Barry, you have to clean up the hall. Do you understand? Yes. Barry's voice when she answered was harsh. She was engrossed with her work without words and expression as if she was about to die. She was a little worried about the appearance, but she ignored the reason, so she decided to head to Baron Burboom. You are here. As soon as she got off the wagon, it was Baroness Clean who greeted her. She also seemed to have just arrived. As they entered the store together, they could meet Baron Burboom, who opened his eyes wide and looked bewildered.